It is June 26th. It is 7 o'clock. Can I get a roll call?
We'll do that a little slower for sir. Ronnie?
Yes.
Alex? Sorry. Julie? Ira? Megan? Jory?
Here.
Kenneth?
Here.
Rocky?
Here.
Melissa?
Here.
Biden? Ralph?
Yes.
Mark?
Yep.
Carol?
Yes.
Karen?
Yep.
Jeff? Ann?
Yes.
Dan?
Yes.
Davis?
Hey.
Helen? Ronald? Michael? Mark? Carol? Brian?
Here. Oh, that was the other mark.
It might have been the other Carol. Yeah, I think.
I'll figure that one out later.
Okay.
Let's move on, I'll be done. Rick?
Yep.
Dan?
Yep.
Lori?
Yep.
Rebecca?
Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
We have done.
Nice. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Can I get a motion to approve last week's minutes? Motion. Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Fantastic. We have no public here for comments. And I am not gonna make any comments, so, there are 3 items under presentations, reports, and discussions, all from our friends with Michael Aiken and Josh Laskey are here tonight with us. And they have a ton of ground to cover. There are 3 items here. There's the update on process and final output, review of focus groups and preliminary feedback, and considerations of configuration models. The way that we're gonna run this is let them go through each section and then they'll take questions in between. Just, it's a ton of ground to cover. Did we circulate any light reading for our friends tonight?
So, Ronnie, has everyone met Michael before, or is, Michael, is this your first time here since the committee was expanded?
I've been here, but there are a couple new faces that I haven't.
Do you want to just introduce yourself really fast?
Absolutely. My name is Michael Aiken. I run a company called Link Strategic Partners. We're a community engagement firm based out of Washington, D.C. We do work around the country. Our specialty is community engagement processes that need to be open, transparent, inclusive to allow for better outcomes. We work in a lot of school systems. Our work is not limited to school systems. We work in a lot of municipal governments, etc. All of the work we do has community as a core focus. Our job is not to come in and recommend an option. We're not architects, we're not urban planners, we're process people, especially in districts that the planning processes have stalled in the past. We try and put together really transparent, defensible, authentic processes to help people get to a result. And I'm really proud of the work that you all have done here, and it's been great to be a part of it. Part of what I want to do tonight is recap for you where we've been over the last year. I think that's helpful context specifically for some of the expanded members as well. We are in the last stages of this next step of a very long process. What we heard when we came in was a desire to establish and continue some forward movement, some momentum, but to do so in a way that allowed for lots of public engagement and that allowed for this group to move some options forward to the board. Where we're at timeline-wise is a pretty interesting place. You've got a couple more meetings before a report is due to the board. So we're not in a position of weeks of further discussion. We're in a position, not really of days, we're in a position of hours of discussions over the next, today, Wednesday, and I think you have 1 meeting next week before a report goes to the board. So our job tonight is to try and refresh where we were and then work us as a group through some discussions to figure out how we're going to get to a final report in a pretty short and compressed time period. Does that make sense? Perfect. The packet you have in front of you is comprehensive. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it because none of this, except for the focus group report on the back, is new. All of this is stuff that you have all seen before. We wanted to put it together because it has been a very long process. The very first document you have is the public opinion survey that was commissioned last June. This was before we were involved. It was commissioned last June after the failed referendum to get a sense of where the public was on a variety of issues. So that's first. In December is when we all started working together. We came and did a strategic brain trust, which is a fancy word for sitting in a room together and figuring out what we're trying to accomplish. And in December of last year, these were the goals that were outlined that we were trying to accomplish. The main things in here, get a referendum passed, get some forward movement, but do it in a way that brings the community back together, builds trust among neighbors, builds trust in a process, and you'll see all of those documents there. Then in January, we were back to give you the results of a stakeholder audit report that we did, talking to dozens of stakeholders that were identified by this community as people that needed to be consulted early in the process to get a sense of where the boundary lines are. We talked to lots of no people and lots of yes people and lots of public officials and lots of former school board members and current school board members and community members to get a sense of where the goalposts were on what worked and what didn't in the past. And that was the stakeholder audit report in January. The first public document that came out of all of this was a joint letter that was authored by the entire cabinet, the entire school board, and the entire 2.0 group. This became a really important milestone because there was lots of transition. You had a superintendent that was leaving, you had some board turnover, you had some staff turnover, and all of that happened in a period of great uncertainty. So you all came together and wrote and edited this letter that went out in the newspaper and went out to all the homes. Then we started doing some focus groups together. The first reported here are focus groups that were done in February. The focus groups at this point were very much focused on process. What does a process need to look like over the coming months that is defensible, that's above board, that's transparent, and will give people confidence in what comes out of the other end of that process. So this is the focus group report that came out of that. That then informed a series of community meetings that happened in March. This very lengthy document you have here are the key takeaways from those March meetings, as well as literally every Post-it note that was logged at that meeting. So one of the principles in this engagement round was for people not to have to guess on how their feedback was being collected and used. Part of building trust in that was making sure that people who came to the community meetings could also look through these reports and see literally word for word what they wrote up on those boards. None of this was edited, none of this was picking up themes. Here's everything that was said to inform the next stage of that process. All of that was used to put together the first mailer that went out to all the homes in the district. And this mailer was not intended to sway anyone one way or another. This was intended to establish a fact pattern. Where are we right now as of March 2017 when this went out? That went out to inform the next process. Then another survey was conducted, and the results from the April report are in here. Which company did the survey? Acuity did this. Acuity. So in here you have the high level. Of course, there's a far greater detailed full survey results. If it even doesn't have them, the district has them, but this is the key findings from that survey. That informed the next mailer that went out in June, again to all the districts, all the houses in the district, that laid out where we are, where we're going, and what the rest of this process looks like. And again, this was an attempt to get everyone on the same page, give them the same glossary of terms, concepts, to get ready for the next round of community meetings. The goal being, let's make people as informed as possible before we ask them to give us feedback. A lot of community processes put people in a room and ask for feedback, but they haven't done anything to prepare people to give really meaningful feedback. And so this was an attempt to do that. And again, I can't stress enough how impressive it's been that all of this has been community-led. Down from the content, the design, we played a role in putting it together, but this came out of this committee, and it was really remarkable. Last thing in here, you have the community forums that were held in June. This is the feedback and themes that came out of the last big, wide-ranging community meeting, looking at a variety of different models. And then last but not least is a high-level key takeaways document from the focus groups that wrapped up last week. So this is a fresh document. You guys have not seen this one. This will be new content for you tonight. We have full focus group reports with unedited transcripts that will be ready for you later this week. So you have all of that data and it'll be all public. But for tonight, given the constraints of how quickly the focus groups just wrap, we want to at least give you the key takeaways document. That is what we heard in the focus groups. Again, this is not us injecting opinion into any of this. This is just a recitation back of what we heard from the focus groups. That's a lot, and so I want to stop and take any questions on the process by which we got here, and then my colleague Josh, who facilitated the focus groups, can walk through these findings at a high level and answer any questions about what came out of the focus groups. So before I turn it over to Josh, any questions from anyone on a year that we just covered in 6 minutes. It's a lot of work.
Happy anniversary, everyone.
Especially for some of the folks who weren't here at the beginning of the process, I do want to make sure we leave time to answer any questions about the thought behind any of this. The goal is, it is highly unlikely in any process that you're going to come out of it with everyone saying, here is the one option we all agree on, and this is what we want the board to do. It doesn't happen in any district we ever work in. The goal is to come out of it with a process that every single person, whether your option advances or not, can look at that process and say, this is a fair, transparent, and defensible process that we understand and that we explain to other people. So I want to make sure everyone truly feels that way. If you have questions about any of this, ask us, because the goal really is to heal some of that division in the community by being able to say, as this now transitions back to the school board, that we as a 2.0 committee made up of people who voted yes and no and indifferent came together and put together a process that we could defend. This process was transparent and open and just about as public as it could have been with the level of data that was out there. Any questions on that, sir?
Can we talk about the takeaways now? Are we there?
We can move to that next. I want Josh to give a quick overview of it, but is there any questions on anything else? If not, we'll move right into Josh. So you've got it in front of you, but just give a couple high level.
Yep. So I will say that we held 3 focus groups last week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We had 15 participants in each, so they were pretty large focus groups. Really lively discussion. I was saying to some of the 2.0 team members that supported those discussions. Thank you, by the way, for doing that. It was a pleasure to have you there. That, you know, in some focus groups that we've done, it's hard to get people to talk. People wanted to keep going. So we had 2 full hours of really good, really intense, focused discussion, and I was really happy to see that kind of response. So the headlines are that there was no huge surprises, and you're going to see things in these key takeaways that confirmed much of what we've already heard in the past, most specifically during the community forums, which I attended and helped coordinate. And you'll also see some consistency in the themes that we've been hearing since, frankly, the beginning of the process about a year ago. So real quickly to go through these, kind of bullet by bullet. Majority of focus group participants absolutely supported change, and this comes from motivation of wanting to see the district remain competitive. They also want to see consistent and equitable access to opportunity. We heard from a lot of participants that they moved to the district specifically for its schools, and they feel maybe concerned that D112 can't compete with neighboring districts if the status quo is maintained. Models B, D, and E were seen as the most quote-unquote reasonable options by a lot of participants. They represented compromise, also represented a really good return on investment. In terms of the options, the only occasional option or occasional exception to that was Model B, which was criticized for high cost. Third bullet, the grade center concept was presented in Model D, was positively received, other than maybe the frequency of grade level transitions. Model C, while it was praised as an equitable option, was not positively received overall. For many, the single middle school was simply a non-starter. Participants expressed that models F, G, and H were a continuation of the status quo, or we heard kicking the can down the road quite a bit. Model A was seen as cost prohibitive and also too much change for broad support, and also bared too much resemblance to the failed referendum. Several focus group participants made the comment that they're really looking to the board for leadership in making a tough decision here, and they're looking for action to be taken soon, frankly. Last bullet we wanted to mention was that a lot of individuals commented on the need for greater communication, especially to less engaged individuals in the community, and we heard discussion around concern of lack of reliable information about voting procedures and what changes would actually look like. We got a lot of questions asking for more information, despite the breadth of information we actually put in front of people and asked them to reply to. So that was noteworthy. I'll sort of leave it there. Would love any thoughts, questions. Happy to answer those or go through further.
I'll add one piece of context to set this up. This is a focus group, and what we reported out reflects the views of the people who are around that table. You should not take this as gospel. You should not take this as the will of the general community. You should take it as the thoughts of the people who are at that table. What is helpful is there's nothing in here that was directly contradictory to what you also got out of the community forums. So what you're starting to see is some consistency in how people are viewing these. And that's a helpful thing as you're starting to try and pick out themes at the end of this.
Yeah, when you say here, participants concerned about the lack of reliable information, and I think in changes to schools would
Yeah.
actually look like, are they talking about boundaries?
I think.
Yeah, Nicholas, go ahead.
No, this came out in, communication, everyone said, they looked at me and said, well, you just said you're a communication guy, but I have this comment. And I said, it's fine, I've only been here a year. And frankly, it starts by the referendum, with the referendum in that process. And that process sowed a bunch of mistrust because there just wasn't communication there. So I didn't hear anybody say, well, you didn't communicate around boundaries per se, but I think it was a general comment about the lack of communication that was then and maybe even now. A couple people did say that they felt 2.0 did a better job in the last year communicating.
Right, because I get, because I got a lot of comments at the forum, they want to know about boundaries, so that's why I thought maybe this was tied to that. And just as a comment, which I know you can't say when you're in a focus group like you're wrong, but, I don't know what could be done more to communicate with people who don't have kids in the school or have kids in the school, because it was on Comcast, I mean,
Yeah. There are a couple things in the communication that are interesting when you go back and read the raw comments, which you'll all do when we give you the report. We run the risk right now of thinking that because this has been going on so long in the district, that everyone's an expert on it. You've been talking about this as a community for close to a decade. At the same time, there is still a lot of complexity around how referendum works that some people just don't know. There were more than one people at a focus group who asked if they could have multiple choice on the ballot to vote for. And, bonds here have to be a binary choice. But that seems basic, but we have to remember that for most people, they need a refresher on all of this, even though you've talked about this. It's a good note for all of us.
Is it fair to say, sorry, because my question about the voting.
Please go ahead.
Confusion about voting procedures is in fact not an understanding of what the available choice would be. And if I read what you're saying correctly, you're advocating that in the lead up to any possible referendum, that there be very clear communication about what language goes on the ballot and and then why you can't pick from multiple things to minimize the confusion and the antagonism toward that.
Yes, and a really clear explanation of how that language got on the ballot.
Okay.
We saw it in some of the initial takeaways. It's in this report. Right or wrong, and we weren't here through a lot of that, right or wrong, there was some belief that the language that ended up on the ballot last time was disconnected from the public process that led to that. Right or wrong, you need to be able to track back how the language was tied to the process, so we need to just be very clear in communicating it.
But do you mean even like who writes the language? Are you talking about that level of the thing? Or could you say more about the disconnect?
So in any community process where there is a community committee coming up with recommendations that then are turned over to another body, sometimes that's a staff and superintendent, in this case it'll be to a board, there has to be a really diligent effort to maintain that level of open, transparent communication through that transition. And this is not me accusing anyone of anything in any district, it's these handoffs are inherently messy. You have a community group of 30 plus people who've been working on this for a year. They're going to hand a report to another public body who has all the same public reporting requirements. It is likely that at some point over the next few months between now and a bond, certain things are going to shift. And as those shifts happen, it's got to be clear how that takes into account the public process that has brought people to this point.
So it'd be wise, even in the report, to clearly signal that this report is not gospel. It is recommendations, and it will remind people.
And we'll get to this in the next section, but in my experience, the best reports you should think about as when you're putting a whole bunch of countries around the table and you're trying to come up with an agreement that everyone can sign, right? They generally have certain standards. They have a preamble that says, as a body, we all agree to these principles. As a group, we believe these recommendations should be moved forward, these recommendations should not be moved forward, and there might be some recommendations that were not clear either way, and we'll provide some pros and cons. And then there's a recommendation section generally at the end that says regardless of model, here are some things we recommend. Over communication, transparency, et cetera. It probably look like that at some level.
Thank you.
It might not be the most efficient course, but would you suggest that there be a sort of a reconstituted 2.0 to continue after the report is done so that it's possible to create that kind of response and call between the board and the community, whatever that is?
Let me give you a couple answers to that because I think it's a really good question. The main thing is a communications vacuum after the handoff is wildly detrimental to every process we've ever worked in, especially in the middle of the summer. This is a hard time to keep people's interest. So if 2.0 makes a recommendation in July and then there's no communication until September, you've lost all of that momentum that has gone into this moment. So at some level, that communication has to be maintained. What that formally looks like needs a lot of active dialogue between this body and the board. There are arguments to be made in lots of different cases. By and large, I would say without equivocation that keeping this body involved at some level makes a tremendous amount of sense. You know the most about it. What that looks like is open for debate. We've worked in districts that have intentionally not wanted to keep a group like this together so that that group could take a more political leaning position when a referendum is called. And you're constrained in your ability to do that if you stay constituted as a board. We've worked in other districts that have said we want to keep this together as a board committee because we want that institutional knowledge. There's no right or wrong way, but it's important to think about that if you believe this is heading towards a referendum. Does that help?
One other thing I'd offer from the focus groups that I thought was interesting is that toward the end of the discussions, and some of the 2.0 team members that were there can probably confirm or add to this, we sort of had a little bit more of an open-ended conversation, and it tended to focus on the sort of need for more messaging and more communication to get out, and participants were offering up ideas on how to connect with the community, especially those that maybe were harder to reach. They were talking about campaign strategy leading up to the weeks right before the ballot. It was really interesting to see that level of ownership and investment by the folks that had just gone through a couple hours for the discussion on these models and on the process. So there's a lot of energy around the communication beyond this sort of phase right here.
Can you tell us a bit about
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about the demographics of who showed up to these?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
I would say it might be better to start with the screening process and talk about how we screen folks that we got in touch with. And maybe even before that, how we did outreach. We had a number of ways we reached out to the community to get people interested in the focus groups. The June mailer actually contained a line toward the end, call to action. If you're interested, please get in touch. Community forums, we had signups. We empowered all of you to go out and connect with community members. We ran ads in the Highlander and the Landmark, posted on the web, posted to social, did a couple of other things to get the word out. So we had, I think, over 100 people express interest in coming out to one of the focus groups. The screening process, we called everyone on that list. We looked at age demographic, we looked at racial and ethnic background, we looked at the relationship to the district, parent of a current student, parent of a future student, parent of a former student, community member, taxpayer, or other. We looked at level of information, how informed those individuals were, whether you're a registered voter, are you comfortable discussing your opinions in a group setting, that kind of thing. We screened for any relatives of 2.0 members or school board members, and then we also looked at geographic distribution by understanding what the closest school was. So the end result was that we got, I think, as diverse makeup as we could. I saw a really good age range. We also had a really good geographic diversity of the folks in the room, and anyone where we saw conflicts, we screened them out. So.
Not as well represented as I would have liked for non-English speakers. So I think that's always a challenge when you're doing focus groups, but it's something to keep in mind as you go forward. And I think there is always more that can be done to reach people who don't have kids in school, especially when you have 80% of them being your voter base. I think we were well represented here, but I think because they make up such a disproportionate amount of your voting base, thinking about the next steps of how to engage them is going to be really important.
I would just say there was a wide array of ideas. I mean, as much as you want to read into the ideological kind of expanse of our district, there were people that were advocates for neighborhood schools, people that were not advocates for neighborhood schools, people that you would say didn't want to spend money on AC, and people thought that was absolutely something we should be spending money on. There were people that may have been younger, on the younger side, but don't have kids in our district, and older people, middle-aged people that don't have kids in our district. So, I'd offer that.
So you guys made the comment that 45 or 15 times 3, 45 people is a big subgroup or a big group. But it sounds like with all these different categories of demographics, I don't do this for a living, so I don't understand how that works. We just heard like 40 different criteria. Obviously there's crossover, but how do you translate that to this is a good cross-section?
And then you have to get them grouped into 3 different focus groups that
Right.
aren't dominated by the same opinion group. It's an art and a science. You over-recruit to make sure that you have enough people at the table. I think we do this in a lot of districts. I feel very comfortable that you had a good representation of your district at these focus groups. I would also caution you to read too much into a focus group. And a focus group is a way to get deeper. A survey is a way to get public opinion, and a community group is a way to engage people through that whole process. School systems, all systems get in trouble when they rely too heavily on one or the other. You guys have spent a lot of resources and time doing all 3. Now you need to figure out how to convert all that into the next step. And my sense would be as the board goes through their iterations and their process, there are going to be elements of all of those that are continue to be valid ways of getting feedback.
Was there any sense of, I mean, you broke the plans generally into 3 buckets, but was there any sense of, you're giving us too much information, there's too many things here for us to look at, or not really because you parceled them out?
Yeah, so there's as many people that say you're giving us too much as there are saying we don't have enough information. The overarching sense, if there was one, and this is not just the focus groups, this came out in the survey and in the community meetings, is, for lack of a better word, make a decision already.
Right.
There's a general sense of we don't have the tolerance as a community to keep doing this.
That was across the board.
Across the board, and we've heard it in every step.
Well,
of
I
the
meant a
process.
slight different inflection on like that. There's so much here that I don't feel like I can really give you a valid opinion because I can't process it. Not that I'm tired of all the information.
We didn't hear that directly.
Okay.
I would caution you to be aware of the communication around this.
Yeah.
This is wildly complicated.
Right.
The level of analysis this body's done goes beyond the level of analysis that most school systems do with demographic and architecture firms backing up everything they do.
Right.
If you look at these models, these 8 models, these one-pagers, there's 15 pages of data condensed down in a really good way to a one-sided or 2-sided page that you guys did. We didn't produce these. You've taken an incredible amount of data. It's still overwhelming for the vast majority of people, and we have to think about that as you go to that next
If I
step.
could jump in on kind of what I heard, I was there on Thursday night, one of the 2.0 members, along with Becky, and we got to answer questions and kind of present the models very briefly to the group and listen to the conversation. It did sound like an early 2.0 discussion where people had started from very different places. So there was quite a lot of debate that particular night. I think was the one you said was the more feisty one. But a couple of things I was listening for. There's nothing here that we like or is too complicated, can't straighten it out. I think what I really want to validate that I personally saw what Michael's referencing, which is that the need for change wasn't we can't deal with this process any longer. It's like we can't deal with this process not being complete because it's important to finish.
Right.
So I felt like that was the strongest piece of momentum was let's get on with it already. Not you guys finish your process because you don't like the process, but because this needs to be done. Like we've got to get past this. This is damaging our community.
I
think people
second
felt
that.
that was really bad.
And I was there on Friday, and people want a decision made, and they want, I'll rank up that they want schools closed, they want a decision made, they want things merged, they want things reconfigured, they want boundaries drawn, they want to move on. They want this stuff done, and they want just their kids in these new schools, and just let's move on with it.
So it wasn't a sense of this is going to be terrible if it doesn't look exactly like X. It was really a sense of like it's got to change, and they would argue about details, but the overall thing was kind of pushing forward was the big theme that I heard.
Yeah.
And also the themes were consistent, because you talked about how there can be sometimes a disconnect. The themes that came out sounded very much like what I what I personally heard at the Community Engagement Forum.
Right.
And what was summarized was very similar to kind of the things that people articulated, even about the individual models, they said very similar things.
100%, and you start getting into what does forward movement mean, right? Everyone loves forward movement until the thing that's moving is the thing they disagree with. And that's what we're facing. I want forward movement, but now you put something forward that I don't agree with, so stop and delay this.
Yeah.
The delay is the easiest way to stop something in a very complex process. So we need to think through, how do you maintain that commitment to forward movement while not shortchanging the complexity of what you're in? And I think, and no one's asked me for this opinion, but I think the more unified that the communication can be about next steps continues to be a really good idea. I've not vetted this with anyone, but I think the idea of a letter that kind of wraps up the 2.0 process.
Yeah, when you say unified, who unified with whom? What do
So
you mean?
when the first letter was written, there was a belief that we were hearing in our calls, the belief that the staff and the board and the community groups and everyone were on completely different pages. That letter was an attempt to say, we don't know how this is all going to work out, but we're all committed to a process to try and figure it out. As simple as this sounds, I think there's probably a letter at the end of this process, after this goes to the board, that says, we committed that we would work together, we have done that, and now it goes to X, Y, and Z. We just kind of need to remind people that as this gets messy, which it will as you get closer to a referendum, that there's been a level of coming together that was desperately needed, and I don't think enough people understand happened to get it to this point. Does that make sense? And I'm trying not to make generalizations. I can give you lots of national trends, but every system is different. In general, referendums pass more when you have a more unified board versus a fractured board. That's a generality. There are many school systems that have failed a referendum and passed the next one. There are far fewer school systems that have had 2 failed referendums and had a successful 3rd one. The probability statistically goes down pretty dramatically each time, with that exception of a failed one sometimes leads to a more likelihood of a successful one because people realize what not doing it matters. So that's the difference there. The other thing that gets really dangerous is when a school board accepts a recommendation from a community group and then goes in a completely different direction. We've seen that in Illinois just recently. Hawthorne District took a recommendation from a community group and then went in a very different way. And a referendum that on paper should have passed didn't. And so there's some stuff there to just be aware of. You have to make it your own. That's not saying anyone has to take a recommendation and act on it without changing it. It's just saying there are certain things that statistically have a higher probability of passing than others.
2 things, briefly. I wonder if there's an opportunity, and I don't know if it's in the kind of letter that you just described or somewhere else. Josh, you mentioned that so many people are really eager to get involved and support this. If there's a way, I don't know, to the community at large, or maybe just to all of the people who attended the forums, who participated in the focus groups, to say, we're so grateful that you've been involved every step of the way. We're hoping that you'll, I don't even know what that would look like, but do you think that there would be value in something like that? Just a thank you and like.
Yeah. We've toyed around with a few other districts we work with on this sort of concept of a, it's not the right term, but like a thank you tour. It's an opportunity to build, goodwill during a transition period, during a process, amidst maybe a handoff. So if there's an opportunity to thank people that came out to focus groups or community forums or give us feedback in one form or another, we should take that because it's been valuable for us to inform the decision making. And there should be acknowledged with that, without a doubt.
Well, and to really, make good on this ask for sustained engagement, like to make it really meaningful. And then my other thought was just to Davis's question. So I wasn't at any of the focus groups, but at the forums, I did hear, I was at both nights, and I did hear a number of people saying this is a lot. And I think it was actually really important to show how complex it is, and also give people time to look at it and reflect. And there were a couple people who came both nights. There were a couple of people who would go to a station and have one take and then come back and say, in context, my perspective on this has shifted. So I actually feel like showing as much as we have really goes towards showing the work, but also letting people ramp up on their knowledge in a very effective and quick way. Because to your point, like a lot of us have been going deep for a long time. There are some people who know just enough to be dangerous, and there are others still who don't know much at all.
Right. And the easiest way some of you have heard me say this since the day I got here. It's much easier to advocate a no position than a yes position in any public process. There's no value judgment attached to that. It's just communications theory. In a no vote, you can pick one of 10 things and make that the reason to vote no. For a yes vote, all 10 things have to make sense as a package. It's just easier. So if we're moving towards a referendum and we're moving towards an option, we're moving towards whatever we're moving to, the more consistency that we can have as a community around why this package makes sense together is how you buffer against people who are legitimately going to have one or two things they don't like about any package. The other thing I would offer in trying not to get outside of my lane here, the best way to engage people who aren't directly having kids in school is to not engage them just through the school system. So thinking about the role of other government bodies, of mayors, city councils, Lions clubs, whatever they are, the more that the next phases of this can include them and what comes next, the better you are at reaching people who aren't your audience.
This may be hard to pull together, and I want to build upon what Ronnie's saying. It's a question. In a kind of thank you letter, if the district were organized enough with us and we knew what the other engagement opportunities would be for the next month, if there's going to be a survey, if there's going to be community meetings, does it make sense to package all that together? Thanks, and here's what's happening specifically with deals.
Yeah, with as much specificity as you can, and if it's not specific, you can say, and the next step in this process is the board takes it over.
Right.
And they will be providing updates at their monthly meetings, and you can look here for this information. But just a way of saying, we're not stopping, we've moved to the next level.
Following up on what you said, my niece was in town for a short visit, and I told her about this committee, and she said to me, that's very interesting. She's from New Jersey.
Okay.
She said, my son is moving to middle school this year. My daughter is in 4th grade. Her school is closing. She will have 1 year in her next school before she moves to middle school. And I said, how did you feel about that? She said, they answered all my questions. She said, I was violently opposed to it at the beginning, but I came to see that she was moving with her class, that there were cohorts, there were friends. She's in special ed for something, her teacher would be there. All this followed through, and she's really excited about the next school year, and so am I. So that's what we're hoping for here.
That's probably about as perfect as a summary of what a collaborative process can be versus a consensus process. You're not ever going to get people excited about closing schools and making classes bigger. There's no human way that is something people jump up and down and say, I'm excited about this. But if the process is answer the questions and help understand why it's necessary and can lead to a better outcome, that's about as much as you can expect out of a community engagement process. Other questions?
Yeah, you've talked about several documents, we've got the report, et cetera. You've given some ideas on how those might be formatted. Have you given those ideas formally to people writing it?
Yes, we had a discussion earlier today at a broad level on what this could look like.
Terrific.
And yeah, let me throw out a couple process things, which is the next agenda item on here as well, and I think it starts to all flow together. This has been an aggressive timeline from the beginning, and you guys have lived up to it. We're in a really aggressive timeline now to get a report done. I have full confidence that it will happen. I'm happy to give a couple thoughts on how this generally becomes a little bit easier when you're trying to get 30 people to jointly author a report that's going to go to another public body. It is highly unlikely that if we run around the table and you'd achieve consensus on any one model, needless to say all of them, it is highly likely that you could achieve consensus on some key themes, and you could achieve some consensus on an overall report that goes forward that includes pros and cons. So my recommendation from process would be, think about the components that would need to go into a report that a 2.0 committee would feel comfortable standing as unified as possible and saying, we stand behind this document that's going forward, even if that document doesn't say, my option is the best option. What I'd love to do tonight, and I brought this straw poll paper, if we can get to it at some point tonight, is literally hand out a piece of paper. This is not a vote. We're not taking a vote. This is not a public meeting where we're taking votes. I would love to get a sense just from a facilitation standpoint on each of the 8 models. If you individually as a 2.0 member think that that's a model that should be recommended to move forward, if that's a model that shouldn't, or if you don't have enough information and you want to discuss it more as a group before forming an opinion, just check that box. I do this in every district I work in because 9 times out of 10, the group's a lot closer together on these than they think they are. And it's just a helpful place to know how much work we need to do on Wednesday night and next week to figure out which ones need to actually spend the time. The other thing I would ask this group to think through is, are there things that you've spent a year or at least a few months together, are there things that you think you do have uniform agreement on that could be part of that preamble? The only one I would throw out there, because I try not to get deep in the weeds here, I have not heard in months of doing this any real objection to full-day kindergarten. It seems like every model that's gone forward includes it, and it seems like all of the community feedback, minus 2 post-it notes I read, I thought it was a good idea. So those are the types of things that if there's actual uniformity, put that in a report that we've spent a year on this, and we as 2.0 feel very confident in saying anything that goes forward has to have full-day kindergarten. There would be others that could involve some price limits. If there's some price ceiling that you guys collectively think that if we go above this, it's not going to pass, and you think there's actual uniformity on that, figure out what that number is and include it as a preamble. That gives some context to the board for the options that follow, and that's generally a helpful thing. Does that make sense from a process standpoint? So I'd love to do this straw poll if people are comfortable with it. I think it's just instructive. How it would generally work, I'll hand these out so you can see what's on there. It basically just has all 8 models listed, and it says yes, no, question mark. I can't be clear enough that this is not a vote. This is not asking you to lock in. This will not be reported out as a vote. This is a facilitation tool to understand how we can best use the rest of tonight, Wednesday, and then sometime next week.
Are you going to summarize the results tonight?
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll just tabulate it.
Operators are standing by?
Yeah. We'll add them up as I talk to them about other things.
Yeah, one thing that I think, and not to be the dead horse about last time, but one thing I think was a real problem in the last referendum was that people didn't think that there was transparency.
Right.
Okay, that they thought that we were hiding things or
Yep.
whatever. So how do you translate that to say, this has been a really transparent process?
So the best thing you have going in your favor is that it has been a really transparent process, right? So you don't have to message it, you have to help more people know that. And that is going to be making sure all of this stuff lives somewhere online, that people who tune into this 3 months from now have an easy way of going back and understanding how they got here. That's going to be the biggest part of it. The second part of it is going to be making sure that any decision that's made after this is also living up to those standards of transparency and engagement. It's when people think things are happening in closed rooms and closed doors that they get really worried.
I think that was a big part of it.
On the straw poll, how many yeses, how many nos?
So we are not, I'm not limiting that. I want you to say, if I think of option A, I think that should go forward, shouldn't go forward, or I don't know. Option B, I think it should.
So it's however many, if I want to have 32 no's and 1 yes?
Exactly. Once you start putting parameters on it, it becomes more of a vote, and that's not what this is. This is just saying as a
Thank
gut from where you sit. The goal here, just to be fully transparent, is to have more yeses and nos than question marks. If we get these back and we have 30 people that have question marks on 8 options, we've got to find about 30 hours over the next 2 weeks to get us all on the same page. So the goal is to try and have more yeses and nos, but clearly.
Can I just say one thing to second what Lori had said about the transparency? This is something I took away from, and you literally talked about this like 10 minutes ago, about one of the things I took away from Friday was there were definitely people who saw that what CFAC ended with and what their report projected and what their recommendations were not what the board put forth on the referendum. I think that that's where people talk about the lack of transparency. I think that's where the disconnect was, and I think that's what you were trying to skirt around saying, so I'm just gonna say it.
Yeah.
Because that kind of, I got that feeling. So I think that that's what people were talking about. That's my takeaway.
And I'm not attempting to skirt around this at all.
Yeah,
I think
just
there's
say it.
absolutely that. The other thing I would say here, though, is what you're doing is putting forward recommendations for further exploration. Further exploration is going to uncover additional information that will likely result in some of these models evolving. So that has to be done in a way that no one feels that it was changed, but it evolved in a transparent way that wasn't secretive. Does that make sense? It would be highly unlikely that something doesn't change between now and a ballot, because you're collecting more and more information every day, and that should allow for a process to evolve.
What's your name?
And is that a reason really for continuing the committee process?
Or at least continuing
In some way.
dialogue.
Yeah, in some way
Yeah.
there's a vehicle for dialogue.
Right.
It's not a black box.
Hey, we don't need names on these or anything like that.
So also in terms of transparency, I would just be curious, we did put all of this information, on our website, and I would be curious to know, did Nicholas step out?
Did quickly, yes.
Oh, okay, he comes back. I would just be curious to know how much traffic
It's a great question.
has changed or been impacted since the forum, since all this information went up. Are people looking at it? Are they thinking about it? Right, I'm just curious. That's a really good point. People who couldn't make it to the forums, but they understood that the information was available, did they go look at it? Did they check it out?
We're making a strong
Great question. In the comfort of their own home.
I don't want anyone to feel rushed. We've got time tonight for this, so take the time you need to fill out your paper, and as we're doing that, we can still take questions and talk about process. What we'll do is Josh will tabulate all this when they're all ready. We'll figure out where we are and then try and think through a timeline for how we get to a report.
Is there anything, somebody brought some treats, or these are left over from today? You sure they were today?
I brought some with John.
Was there anything?
Wait, who brought them?
She brought
I brought some back
You
there.
brought some back here also.
Yay, thank you. So we are.
Was there anything during the discussions about size, dollar figure, that came up, either sort of willingness to fund, but also on the flip side about this question that we heard that the forums are operational savings? So, to what extent were you talking about money, the dollar figures during these?
Yeah, to some degree, both came up. I think in each of the focus groups, there was at least a little bit of acknowledgement that willingness to pass referendum, it couldn't come close to a $200 million number, obviously. I think the more I heard, it was, a preference toward something in the range of 100, but that may not be realistic. When we started to get into conversations about, what are the operational cost savings, things got a little murky. I think, there were varying levels of understanding of what it means to, plan for operational savings down the road. And because we didn't have, operational cost modeling, in place, some people were like, well, how do you expect us to respond when you ask us about, financial sustainability?
So
piece?
to what extent does that how do other districts handle that in terms of the operational stuff? Because we understand here that our administration would find it to be a pretty difficult task to price out 8 models, maybe even 3 is too many, I'm not sure. But how do other districts handle that?
So there are going to be people that are going to hate this answer. There's never been a magic number in a district that was based on economic modeling. Every district I've ever worked in, the number that people think they can tolerate is mostly informed by fact and also informed by an emotional response to what I listened to last time. So in a district where you have a lot of people say no to a number, there are going to be a not insignificant number of voters who are going to look at, did you listen to them and come up with a smaller number? And do I think there's enough change in that number that I'm comfortable pulling the lever? I say that people don't like that because you can't model that, you can't survey that. That's an emotional response to people who don't want to get invested in the details, who want to go into the voting vote and say, I said no, and they took $60 million off, and now I'm comfortable voting for that. That's unfortunate because you can't model it, but it's something to keep in mind. I would strongly recommend not going back with the same model, which no one is planning on. But that's the piece that's going to get interesting as we get to the political process.
Was there any way to decipher the people that were interested in cost and sustainability, which demographic was most interested in that versus not interested?
It's a tough question to answer because the focus groups, like we've kind of painted, are a very small microcosm where you're able to go deep in discussion. I almost think it's a more informed response to talk about if we had survey results that could speak to that and sort of represent a larger swath of the population. I didn't see a direct correlation during the focus groups. I don't know if any of the 2.0 team members saw, if folks, 65 and older are more concerned with cost, if, folks without children in the district were more concerned with cost. I didn't see that kind of correlation. It wasn't overtly obvious to me. So it's a great question, though.
I have a question that really doesn't concern, well, it does concern us, but I got my assessment for my property taxes. I assume we all did. It went up 5%. It said 5%, and then it gave some cockamamie reason, which I still haven't figured out. And then a friend of mine said, my bill went up 5%. I assume everybody's bill went up 5%. Does anyone know why?
Your bill did not go up, the assessments went up. Bill doesn't change.
Yeah, the assessed valuation.
It might.
It could go up, Britt.
Yeah, but it depends on the average. It will go up.
It will go up.
it'll go up by
5% is
CPI.
going to go up.
So, if you read the whole letter, it says that all of Murray Township went up 5.04%.
Right.
So if yours went up 5%, you're on par with the rest of.
That doesn't help.
So your taxes will go up by the rate of inflation.
Except for the lines which are not in inflation cap, which be the pension contributions coming out of certain pension taxes.
What you got was just the assessed valuation for the year.
Right.
It's not directly related to the tax bill, it's indirectly related.
It's indirectly related.
Well, the average was 5%, which is, I did not know, that's great to know.
Rick,
Yeah, straight across.
I used to
Then-
speak on this. If you have questions, I can answer them. But I've got to tell you that 5% indirectly will translate into an increase in your taxes.
I
don't think so.
No.
No.
Not if it's the same as the average. So your taxes will go up by the rate, approximately the rate of inflation.
What was the conversation you heard, if any, regarding the fact that most of these models, if 6 out of 8, isolate dual language, at least at the K-5 level, to 1 or 2 schools almost exclusively?
Yeah.
No, there was significant interest in spreading dual language more broadly across the community. Now, for the parent, it was my observation that the parents in the dual language program understood the constraints of the program. And then there were suggestions that maybe perhaps the constraints of the program should be better communicated to allow everyone to understand why, if it in fact is the case, that it should be in one facility. Is that what you thinking?
I wouldn't have.
On Wednesday night, I think what you're alluding to is there were some people that felt like they were open to electing into the dual language program, but they wanted it closer in their neighborhood or closer to their end of town.
Just a suggestion, that when Common Core was this really hot controversial topic, I did some work for some school districts where we went around to senior citizen centers and we presented Common Core and all the myths on Common Core. And to get people on board, just so that because they were so negative against the schools. And I know 112 did it too, because I went with them to do it. So just a suggestion about going to senior groups like that, to the senior center. We did it at the police station here. They had, when we did it for Common Core for 112, they had way over 100 people coming in senior citizens. So it's just a way to get to that group.
Right.
That's basic.
I think that, yeah.
I mean, they really thought, that Arnie Duncan was going to come and raise their taxes over Common Core.
Right, and why that question about taxes is really important is because when you're putting a referendum out there, you're putting it out into an environment that you don't control any longer. So if people see their taxes going up already, that lends itself to some thoughts about how affordable this place is to live, etc. You also have new leadership at your school system level, you have new leadership at your board level. There have been some not insignificant changes on the curriculum and teaching and learning side of the district recently. At the same time, you're going after reconfiguration and likely starting to look at boundaries and consolidation. That's a lot of stuff for people to digest in a small amount of time. So it's going to be immediately important that the communications around it become as simple as possible without becoming condescending, right? We're not trying to dumb this down for anybody. This is a very complex process, but you don't want to make it so complex that people just turn off. So we've got to find that middle ground from a communication standpoint that makes it digestible, but doesn't shy away from the fact that there is a lot happening all at once. Does that make sense?
I think we've done that with the first two mailings.
Yep. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right on that.
Yeah.
So as Josh is totaling up, this is what I would suggest that we need to do as a group. That depending on how much of these we think are going to take really active kind of model by model debate, we need to figure out some time for that. We also need to figure out as a group how this is being written, who's writing it, what that looks like. We need to come to some agreement on format. And I'll say very honestly, I've not seen a perfect format that works for every district. There's some districts we've worked in.
Sorry.
We've worked in some districts that have written that really narrative-based, text-heavy, here's, right? And then we've worked in other districts that have had a lot more success putting together a really comprehensive slide deck that just explain the options and how you got there. So there's no model that has to be the model. So I would be constrained by what you want to communicate, not by a format that is the magic format.
And can you draw a distinction between the report and the presentation? Are they the same thing with appendices, or are they two different things? Or how do those things intersect? Is the presentation sort of an outline of the report?
In general, if you were going to write a pretty comprehensive report, you would then put a slide deck together to highlight the major points. Just because of the way the calendar is working here and the fact that this group has been incredibly collaborative and wanting to see and sometimes line edit everything, getting a comprehensive report done and agreed to in a week and a half would take a lot of commitment from individual members. A slide deck or a presentation on how you got here and where you think this is going might just be easier to get consensus around.
But then you would put
You would
together.
put all this together as appendices. This is how we got there, this is what we said, and all this rolls up to, here are the things we have unanimous agreement on, here's our takeaway from the 8 models and the ones we say we don't recommend for this, and this reason, we do recommend for this reason, and that would be a great report. And if there's another category of, there's some things that we know we're not recommending or not recommending, but we think have to stay on the table for additional study, that would be that third category, and then some recommendations on what happens next. Does that make sense?
My sense, time suggests the slide deck or the easier model. Is there also some value in making it look and feel quite different than the CFAC report to sort of signal this is a different process? Just you wouldn't want it, in my mind, to aim or mimic that structure because that ultimately didn't work, right? This is new.
Right.
Is there any value in it?
I thought one of the things the model examples did really well was that last bullet point. This is goal for configuration.
Yeah.
It kind of said, like, why are we thinking of this one? I could see that in either the pro or con side put out there. I know I'm a broken record on this, but I have no opinion on what model goes forward.
Sure.
One way, just to illustrate a point here, is if there was agreement on the group that, we think one middle school option has some educational benefits, but we also understand the political reality is that would never pass. That's the type of context that could be really helpful in why a recommendation didn't go forward. You're not saying as a group, we think one middle school doesn't ever work. Right. You're saying there might be some really good benefits of it, but in a year of working and talking to people about this, we don't think politically it would pass. So therefore, we're not recommending this for additional study.
I think that's also good to make it sound like it wasn't driving. You talked earlier, or maybe Josh did, about the sort of consensus versus collaborative process where we agree on one exact model, and it's not what we're agreeing on. We're agreeing that what we heard and the support from the community and all the feedback led us in this direction. We can sort of be specific about that without having to all say, and we like this model the best.
That's exactly right. And it doesn't require, frankly, 2.0 members going on record of saying, we absolutely support this, or we absolutely don't support this. We're saying, as a group, we don't think that's politically viable. And because it's not politically viable, it doesn't make sense to put it forward for continued study. And I think that's a helpful way to start thinking about some of these.
One of the ways that I've been framing this in my own thinking for a long time, and I think it might have been part of the phrasing for the first round of form, is opportunities and challenges.
Right.
And I wonder if that might be a helpful way to, if there is you know, a part of the report where we're going model by model to break out opportunities and challenges and then summarize kind of where we land.
And some of the things we talked about that didn't end up in a model as well.
So are you saying we should vote on three or four or two options to present? Because originally our charge was present X number of options.
Absolutely. I think you have to do that. I think if you don't do that, people will have a very strong belief that this group didn't do what it was asked.
But it's how we back that up, teachers.
And it's how you get to that. I'm trying to be as transparent as I can here. One way this group could do tonight and Wednesday and next week is take a called vote on every model and say Model A had 20 people in support and 10 people in opposition. And based on that numerical value, we're going to decide what to push forward. The other way to do it would be to say, based on this initial straw polling and our belief, we think these three can come off the table with some discussion. These three are probably going to move forward with some discussion, and these three we need to talk about as a group. And if we get some general consensus around the table of that, then you put the entire report up for a vote. And you say, are we comfortable with these recommendations as a package going to the board? And you vote on that. That probably lends itself to a more unified vote as this gets reported out publicly than there was division on 8 options. But we can do that. We've done it both ways. It's just, there's so much trust to be maintained in this community right now. I'm trying to find a way that allows this group to move forward with something that they can stand behind with a bit more uniformity.
So I think one of the challenges I'm having, and maybe others are having the same challenges, there's some models that programming makes a big difference and we haven't considered the programming. For example, if there's going to be dual language in 2 middle schools, that really makes a big difference to me on certain models, whether they look good or don't look good, and that's a decision that we've been told won't be made until the next superintendent, the next interim superintendent in charge of learning comes on and wants to attack two middle school solution or not. There's actually probably 6 models, I think, that actually I think almost every model leaves Northwood very heavily dual language, and then at the elementary school level pretty much has a very small cohort of non-dual language, of monolingual kids, practically every model except for one.
I would probably just bring up, I apologize, what we're trying to also get out of these models are models, because this could happen in 5 years from now. So the models we're coming up with should be as rigid that they can't handle a change in education philosophy, whether it's because of administration or that's just the way the trend is. So while this, I think, is a challenge, I think it's a good example of why we need flexibility in our facilities to be able to handle these ebb and flows that are going to happen in the school systems. We're just having living through one right now. It's going to happen again in a different area in 3 or 5 years.
Let me, go ahead.
I was just going to say, to your point, I went through these models again today, and it seemed like one of the nice things I like about it was they all had roughly equal sized middle schools, 10 and 9 sections. So you could always resplit, to John's point, how you did dual language. And it actually is very nice. It's nice you get that flexibility.
Yeah, but let's be realistic. Something that's put into place 1 year isn't going to be changed the next. It's going to be there for 5, 10 years.
Oh, yeah. I mean, generally education doesn't flip within a year. It's an evolution, but the facilities can handle that evolution is what I'm trying to say. Don't make it that rigid.
You guys are incredibly close together. Let me give you the numbers just so we have some context for what comes next. The easiest way to do this is just write A through H on one side and then yes, no, and question mark on top. And we'll just read out the numbers and then we can go from there. Okay. So Model A.
1 second.
Sorry, take your time. So Model A through H on one axis, yes, no, and question mark on the other axis. How do we have that? We got it? So Model A, 3 yes, 12 no, 4 question mark. 3, 12, 4. Model B, 11 yes, 4 no, 4 question mark. Model C, 10 yes, 7 no, 2 question mark. I feel like I'm calling bingo. Model D, 15 yes, 3 no, 2 question mark. Model E, 13 yes, 3 no, 3 question mark. Model F, 4 yes, 14 no, 1 question mark. Model G, 2 yes, 16 no, 1 question mark. Model H, 5 yes, 14 no, 0 question mark.
Bingo.
So this is a straw poll, this isn't a vote, and I want to be really clear about that. How I generally look at these to try and think through any themes here is I look at the differential between yes and no to see which ones have the widest. And if you look at this here, you've got model A, F, G, and H have the most kind of no differential, and models B, D, and E have the biggest yes. So what this tells me, I'll give you my interpretation, then I will not give you an opinion, and let's talk about this as a group. We clearly have some clumpings of yeses and nos. I think it's a really positive place to be in where we have to go over the next couple weeks. I think there's a not insignificant number of question marks around some of these. Those probably indicate the ones that are going to require a lot more discussion. So I think this is a very good place to be, given where we have to be in a couple weeks. So I'll stop with that, and let's talk about it.
So I want to bring something up, and I want to be careful that I don't overstep my bounds as a board member. But one of the things we've heard is that people want us to do something soon. They want us to take action. Yep. The other thing is, some of the models only work in the case of a successful referendum. Yeah. So, how do we reconcile those two situations, and should that, be a consideration that 2.0 takes into account as they evaluate these options? Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to, go full force. Well, we want to obviously avoid a failed referendum. We obviously want to listen to the community and do something. And how do we reconcile these together?
May I? I totally wasn't going to go there tonight, but since you brought it up. That was a big takeaway after my conversation with all of you last Tuesday, and I recognize that, the long-range view can't hinge on the assumption that we'll pass something right away. So I also spent some time looking at these models. There are only 2 that would require a successful referendum in order to redraw boundaries and close schools, which is to say, you could implement to some degree. Obviously, it wouldn't be pretty and it wouldn't be what we want, but you can make determinations on school closings and make those school closings and make those redrawn boundaries absent of a successful referendum.
Which 2?
Which 2? A and C, I believe, are the only 2 that absolutely require. It's like, and I hate to bring up the specter of the last referendum, but if you think about it, we were told over and over again, there's no plan B, there's no plan B, and it was because there was such a gap between where we were and where that plan needed us to get to, in terms of facilities and moving kids out of schools.
So
it's something to think about.
So maybe we could say it's part of what viable options, it's part of the definition of viable options, right? So we're coming up with several options, not just one. And an important part of that has to be, what if we need something that is going to work without a referendum? And a lot of other considerations too. So I think it kind of goes in the hopper with that. Right. But does that mean that all 3 of them would necessarily have to work without a referendum? No, I don't think so.
I'm just offering it for consideration. But the other thing I would really press on John and the architects to be sure that when you come to those conclusions about viability, you know exactly what that means, and does that include full day kindergarten? Because you could envision some of these scenarios that they would work with closing buildings, but you couldn't achieve that goal also. So if you could explain those trade-offs, that would be helpful.
We have to be careful about what we promise for the alternate case, right?
Right.
I would always so caution, something I heard during the forums and focus groups is, they're looking for action, but it's the right type of action. And one of the things I was surprised about in the focus groups is the last 3 models was not enough change for people. They reacted negatively to those models because the degree of change was not very good.
And how do you expand that? When you say the degree of change, not, what do they?
Too many buildings, too much like PR3.
They use kicking the can.
Kicking the can.
Often, oh, that's right.
So I went from the Link's perspective, you've seen all this feedback. Is that a Maven thing, or these were people who self-selected to be part of? I don't want to misread what a focus group should be telling us. I mean, they're interested in focusing on this for several hours, which is a lot more than the vast majority of their neighbors are willing to do. So is that a factor of those folks, because of their higher access to information, are more likely to have a clear reading of the facts versus should we look at this as truly the whole group is moving along?
So there's going to be a self-reporting bias in every focus group. So the short answer is yes. The other thing I would say to that, though, is the focus group, I'm just looking to make sure this is true, the kind of basic key takeaways and models from the focus groups are mimicking the numbers that you all just wrote down. You also have a very high self-selection bias, and that you guys know the most of this. But if you're now starting to see some trends between the focus groups and this group that knows the most about it, and those are mirroring what you heard in the community groups, you're starting to, again, find some consistency around models that with the right context, I don't think are impossible to move forward with the board in some rational way.
And even if
Mark and I were there on Wednesday night, and I felt like the group, there were sort of people on both sides, but everyone that was there was highly engaged. Many of them were at the forums as well.
Yeah.
They were the group, I mean, several of them said, when I was canvassing for the previous referendum, people said this. So I do think that, I think, yes, people want to move on, but this group really wants to move on.
Right.
Because they've been at it for a long time.
But I would caution you that, or not you, I would just say, with that caveat, is even if you think that these people are only the supporters and no committee, you have to understand that that's your base of support for any plan that you put forward.
Mm-hmm.
So you better check that box first.
Yeah, yes, people need to like this plan too.
Any
for
plan
sure.
that you put forth, if you don't have a good base, and the district didn't have one the last time. So I would say, even if we said that there's a bunch of supporters, well, that's important.
Yeah.
It is, you guys have pushed back at me on any of this. We're making remarkable time as a group tonight. It's 8:20, right? It's not 11 o'clock at night at this point. When I'm looking at these numbers, we can't take anything off the table. You can't vote tonight. None of that was agenda, so I want to be very careful about that. But I think we could start setting the agenda for Wednesday's meeting so that we know what we've got to figure out that night. I'm just going to pick a couple of these. When I look at model G, that was the one that had 2 yes and 16 no. So from a straight up numerical sense, that's the one that seems like it has more, let's not move this forward than yes. I'm not calling anyone out, but is there anyone who wants to make the yes argument? Just so we have the context for it, so we can decide if this is going to be a 15-minute discussion next Wednesday, or if we need to set aside 45 minutes on this model. And I'm going to go through other models, but that's one that's just easy. It's 2 and 16. It'd be great to know where we are as a group on that.
I'd like to just, not particularly on G, but just to pick up on Dan's point. I may be wrong in this, but I seem to remember that the ultimate scheme that went out for referendum that failed grew in dollars for some reason from what it was originally promised.
Yeah.
And on the boards that were presented and in the focus group, there's an upper and a lower range submitted. Now, it could be that a lot of people are thinking, well, if we could get it down to that, it might be acceptable. If we're at the upper range, maybe not.
Right.
I don't think that I'm not sure that everybody here realizes what it takes to get from the upper to the lower and what you have to take out and what you may be missing in terms of people's priorities. Like we heard that air conditioning was about a $24 million item. A lot of people like air conditioning. To get the full air conditioning, you got to get that money from somewhere else to keep at the lower level. I think that kind of thinking, you're going to get to the more attractive level by starting out with a upper level that's lower. You don't have to knock out as much. So I think that should be taken into consideration.
And I think those types of comments are the context that need to be in what goes to the board board. I'm not saying that specific example, but in general, that level of context is going to be really helpful. It seems to me, I'm not an expert in these numbers, but it seems like there's a level of confidence in the numbers that have been put forward. If that's not the case, please let me know that. But I think in any process, numbers do shift. You saw it here in the last process specifically, but it seems like with the level of modeling that's been done, there's a sense of why you have an upper range and a lower range, and what it would take to move those closer together. That's helpful context to provide to the general public.
Well, I think it's the context for when we select the 3 items here.
Let me clarify what the upper and lower is, frankly. It's
Yeah.
truly just a 15% delta between upper and lower, and that's driven based on the discussion we all had, that the upper is full vote everything, and the lower is contingencies being less, as well as removing partial air conditioning in all the schools, meaning don't air condition the hallways, or various items that the board can eventually select. So it's not taking out an entire concept, or it's not a range of costing, it's just a...
Well, it all depends on what number you want to get to.
I understand, but what I've been saying is there's a lot of moving parts. It was just to show an illustration as to what the architect or Gilbane was saying. To do everything you want, here's the upper end, and the
I'm just
lower
saying
end.
that if you start considering the things that we've heard that a lot of people want, which were the below-the-line items in Gilbane's spreadsheet, in order to afford to keep those in and get down to a lower level, you have to start out with a lower, higher level, or else you're going to have to cut more out of the upper level.
I just want to clarify what the 2 differences were. It's not air conditioning or no air conditioning. It's
It's just 15% off.
A question of degree.
It's a discount. So, but I want to check in again with our process guides here. What we did not hear was a chorus of a large block of people, block with a C, either at the community engagement forum or at the focus group, saying all this stuff is out of line. Like, you guys have got to come back with something much cheaper than that. And I think, although we haven't, what we haven't said around F, G, and H, the ones that sort of got the lowest number of yeses here, they aren't appreciably cheaper than anything that we've moved forward, really. So I guess what as we think about how to trim the list down in terms of what we recommend, what we don't, things like that, the educational value of those things I think was very significant, because people saw that just closing a few buildings and renovating them is very expensive, regardless of whether you do it ambitiously or whether you do it with as minimal change as possible. I feel like, Ronnie, you mentioned how some people cycling through the room came back with a different point of view on what they liked at the end, or on something they saw, than they had the first time they went by it, because of comparing it to other things. So how should we think about that in terms of things that we recommend to go forward? It doesn't necessarily mean that they get less pages, lines of text in the report. Maybe the report is just as, the information about why we didn't recommend they move forward with things is just as important as saying what we think is good to keep looking at, right?
I'd like to piggyback on that. I think that when we started approaching actually coming up with configurations and grouping them conceptually, there was a sense that we would very likely pursue, and there's always been this magic 3 number. I'm not sure why 3, but always this thought of 3. That we would advance 3 models for further consideration to the board. And there was a sense, I think, within 2.0 that we would likely prefer a low, moderate, high change set of options. And I think that, to me, the big eye-opener when we got all of the information back from Nagel and Gilbane was that the degree of change didn't correlate with the price tag. So you didn't buy a lot. Like, low change didn't buy you a lot by way of education or sustainability. And I think that I have certainly heard from stakeholders who are trying to reconcile that. And I think this has all happened very rapid fire, and we're having to process this and kind of figure out what the implications are in terms of pursuing something that has some traction with the community. So I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts on how to frame that, because that was the big surprise, honestly, is that there wasn't a huge difference in terms of cost.
What none of these options do, none of the 8, is give people the cheap option. So if you have the under $100 million voters who want to see that level of change, you're not giving them any of that. There's a political risk to that. There's a political risk to that. Now, you're all comfortable with how you got there, but this doesn't give someone a low option, right? If you're a voter who wanted to see the price tag cut in half, we don't have an option.
And have you seen that situation? I mean, I don't know if you've worked in other districts that have the same level of, for lack of a better term, deferred maintenance and deferred upgrades. You know, we all talk about in the course of visiting other districts, we were amazed at how far they got $10 million to go or $30 million, and it's like, well, yeah, you know, we got rid of all of our asbestos in 2005 or whatever, you know.
I do want to point out, if you look at these options, you know, option H, which is one of the ones that was considered, is basically BDR3. And this is obviously a set of renovations and additions and upgrades and all whatnot. But the previous school board was prepared to move forward with that option for a cost of 0. And that is clearly an option that could be done for, you know, that it's a configuration that doesn't depend on really any upgrades or whatever, just for that building plan. And there are configurations that is true for among these, and there are configurations that is not true for. And so for us to just be thinking about the dollar amounts that are on these pieces of paper in terms of what upgrades, what specific things we're putting into these, you know, there are some differences when you take a step back and think about all the things that go into this and whether or not it works at all without these.
Well, they couldn't have.
Absolutely.
Let me do this. I don't want to put anyone in the position of defending their yes or no. What I'd love to get a little clarity on right now are the question marks, especially some of the ones that had 4 and others. I'd love if people are comfortable to just share what more you would like to talk about or get information on specific models.
I'll share. So on A, I put a question mark because of our conversation last week where we talked about the greatest resistance to A was the price, and that was because we had 2 new buildings. We had a new middle school and a new elementary school. So we talked a little bit about it, but what would an 8.1 look like? And so I did a little bit of doodling around with that. And when John talked about the 3 different sites, Lincoln, Ravinia, and Braeside, and we talked about whether or not to bring this to the focus groups, the limitations and challenges of building new on those sites. That it would take a land swap at Lincoln, or it would take taking out a wooded area at Ravinia, it would be taking down a historic building at Braeside. There are all these restrictions, but one point he made was that we own the whole site right now at Braeside. So a modification to A, which would be like an 8.1, would be the Northwood site looking like D&E, where it's a Northwood with an early childhood center in the Wayne Thomas building, and Northwood is either renovated or rebuilt depending on what the finances are, but in the near term, you could eliminate the trailers and move your 6th graders into the Wayne Thomas building so that you could solve for your middle school problem up front, and then treat your other buildings. You already have 4 sections, but instead of your new Southeast Elementary School, Braeside becomes a 4-section building with an addition. We already own the whole site, so your 8.1 then doesn't have an entirely new building at either site necessarily. Depending on what kind of money you have, you could enact that pretty quickly, and it would look it would basically look like VDR without the 2 little sections up at Wayne Thomas. Those would be folded into Indian Trail and Sherwood, so that you would have a 4-section monolingual that is your north central, a 4-section monolingual that is your west, and a 4-section monolingual that is your southeast, with your 2 dual academies, if that's the way the board decided to go. So the 8.1 then becomes, if you move your early childhood up to the Wayne Thomas site, it could become a 7-site program. We were looking at whether or not we had options between 5 and 8, and that would become a 7-site program.
Let me ask a question. as we work through these, for that one specifically, there's clearly a lot of thought in it. I don't know the merits of it, clearly a lot of thought in it. Do we as a group, are we comfortable getting to the point where we're suggesting new configuration options at this point that would become a recommendation? Or would we say, as presented and considered in the community groups and the focus group, et cetera, A had certain limitations.
Correct.
We don't suggest moving that forward as a recommended option because of those limitations. However, if the board wanted to explore it, there are possible other configurations such as this that would be worth exploration. Versus kind of introducing a new model that hasn't gone through
Right.
that community process.
So just a thought, and everybody else obviously can weigh in. I don't want to be introducing new models at this point that have not been vetted through our group, through the community. So I think that any sort of refinements would be in response to feedback on the model. So in this case, the buildings stay where they are, the people pretty much stay where they are, but instead of new buildings, you're working with what you've got. So it's a refinement in response to the cost concern.
To clarify, like the
So
goal,
it's just an
when I
idea.
think about like the goal of that refinement, I think if I heard you right, in this refinement, you suggest that Green Bay would also close? So
I think it could down the road, it could turn into a 7-site program, but here, that would be the last thing that would happen if you had the money to do it. In terms of getting from where we are to this model, I'm just suggesting not building new to bring the cost down. So the goal would be to bring the cost down of A. If down the road we wanted to also eliminate Green Bay, I think that's a possibility, but you would need money to do it.
And when we compare thinking back to why we chose these 8, and one of the things that we were kind of floating out with this one is to gauge the feel of new construction and not.
Right.
And it sounds like new construction was not widely encouraged by the group.
It was cost prohibitive.
Because of the cost.
Mhm.
And if you're suggesting the modification of taking that away, is there an appeal of this model, the configurations of the buildings that are open, versus something like E, which has a lot of similarity to what A would be? Like, it's not, I don't see now like something that A brings that E doesn't bring.
It brings 4
except
sections.
for the possibility of.
So Rick sent me a note, he wasn't here last week, and Rick, you're welcome to speak to it, but it brings 4 sections is the difference. So in E, all the monolingual schools are 3 sections. So in this 8.1, you can see that all the monolinguals are 4 sections in A. So 8.1 is just a variation on using what you have. Instead of building a new elementary school at one of these sites, you do an addition to the site that the district already owns. And maybe you still have the option of building it in Northwood, maybe you don't. I don't know.
Two things about that one, and I understand exactly what you're saying. I feel like, I'm just wondering, did anybody hear discussion about 3 versus 4? I didn't, in terms of 3 sections versus 4.
I didn't.
And then the idea about, I did hear people make sort of cracks about, kind of depends on where the new school is, the 3. And the thing that worries me about introducing, I like all the logic of what you're describing, but I worry about it kind of being coy about where that new location would be and not being very specific, not having a lot of community feedback about that.
That's true.
Versus, kind of like later on sort of saying, and it's going to be at blank, and then
Right, and that was a big
A lot of
concern
people
with
go
this, because
nuts.
I was at this station, and there was a concern about where the building would be and how that would affect boundaries. The 8.1 would have the same boundaries as D. So if you look at D,
yeah.
I mean, and I understand what you're saying, but in terms of boundaries, it would have the same boundaries. It would have the northwest boundary, the north central boundary, the west boundary, and the southeast boundary. But that doesn't alleviate the concern of
It's the boundaries,
where
and
that
I also
building
think the
would be.
other issue that we haven't really tested the communities
Right.
on is the idea of demolishing a building and then
Mhm.
replacing it with something else.
Mhm.
I think we've obviously tested the Lincoln site in terms of like there not being a school there at all. But as far as the other two in the southeast, about whether people feel the same way, I don't know, it just feels like a lot of new things to get, that we really want a lot of feedback on.
Yeah, that's true.
What I'd love to do is, if this is helpful, go through some of the other models and see what those question marks are. So it sounds
Or
like
what were
for,
some of the other question marks on A? Were they
Right.
also variations?
I was
I
one
had
of
to
the
say-
question marks on
Yeah.
A, and my question mark, I don't think it's a bad plan. I don't care for removing, replacing the 3 southeast schools, but the big question mark to me is cost.
Yeah.
This is so far and away the most expensive option that I really don't think it's possible to consider it without ramifications. And I don't think it's fair to make those ramifications without community input on them.
I think that's probably right.
other question marks
I
on
think that the
A?
other piece with regards to A is that whether you build a new 4-section school in Southeast Highland Park or expand an existing Southeast school to accommodate 4 sections, one of the things that's been absent from our interaction with the public, because it is pretty granular, but we've looked at our population maps, and a 4-section school in Southeast Highland Park wouldn't accommodate all of the kids who live in Southeast Highland Park.
Well, it's 2 of the 3. That's, yeah.
It would accommodate 2/3 of the kids that live in Southeast Highland Park, which presents, a different kind of way of thinking about boundaries, for that population particularly, like a radically different way of thinking about boundaries. And I think that would be another barrier.
No, I think that most people assume that the Lincoln students, I know I have, would probably be going to Indian Trail as a likely scenario. That's what I thought before I came to this process. I don't necessarily think that anymore, but that's what I thought 3 months ago. And the idea with, again, I kind of support the A1, if you will. And the big cost differentiation is to utilize the existing Northwood buildings, the buildings on that side, rather than building a new middle school. The cost differentiation difference between a 4-section Brayside and a new 4-section at the Ravinia site, that's something the board can just look at the numbers and say, well, is a new building worth this much extra, whatever the delta is.
Sure, and I think with regards to Indian Trail absorbing the existing Lincoln population, that was something that got talked about in variations of BDR3 a lot. But when you're also moving the Wayne Thomas population,
It doesn't work.
it's really challenging from a boundary perspective. And I think, I've really done the kind of subjective work of letting go of like this idea of neighborhood schools, and I'm okay with it. But I also realize I'm not your average 112 voter.
Right.
And I think that it would be really hard. It would be really hard to get people to embrace this.
One more thing. As a former 40-year Brayside resident, that school, there's a reason that school has historic preservation significance, because it's beautiful. Anybody that ever came to see me would say, that school, I can't believe the way that school looks. I think there would be such hue and cry from Brayside residents if we said we're going to abandon and possibly tear it down at some point, that would be an immediate no for this referendum.
I'm just going to remind, to build on that slightly, I just want to remind everybody that, we briefly talked about the survey results that we had from the survey that we did in the spring. One of the questions was, what is the importance of keeping something in your immediate neighborhood? And in elementary school, we asked the question, what's the importance of keeping an elementary school in your immediate neighborhood? It was 29% extremely important, 24% very important, 25% somewhat important. There's only 11% not very important, and 11% not at all important. The numbers were very different for keeping a junior high or middle school in your immediate neighborhood. For that, it was only 11% extremely important, 17% very important, 30% somewhat important, 26% not very important, 16% not at all important. So, that we may not have heard that as much from the forums or the focus groups. But let's remember that when we did do a quantitative survey of the broader community, that feature about the elementary school specifically, not so much the middle schools, was very, very widely held.
Bear with me as I try and walk us through models. Go ahead.
Real quick, the take home I'm hearing on A is this is an intriguing model. It has a lot of really valuable educational. It meets a lot of important educational criteria, but it also has a lot of other issues that are raised by it. That it's one we identify as, if in a perfect, this would be a fascinating model to pursue, but it's when we're trying to reach some kind of community consensus or do something collaborative, it just doesn't quite get there.
Yeah, got too many variables.
It's got too many variables. And one of its intriguing things is actually, like, we're all sitting drawing alternative maps. This is the one that has so many riffs that you can do off of it.
Right.
It's an incredible amount of flexibility, but it doesn't get us to where we need to get.
From where we are now to where we need to go.
Yeah.
So
how does everybody feel about that?
That right there is how we're going to get to some consensus on Wednesday, and we're starting to vote. That's the type of thing where it'd be great if people say, yeah, I agree with that, great model, but it's not going to be a recommendation, or no, this needs to stay and let's fight about it.
Just a method question. I thought I heard you say earlier something that I think Alex kind of repeated, which was that of the different type of surveys and data we've been working with, the survey is the, air quotes around this, the sort of most quantitative, right? These are qualitative, perhaps. But one of the dangers of this process is that the focus groups and the fora are the most recent in our mind. And Alex was sort of bringing us back to the actual survey we did. How do we sort of deal with that? Because our tendency is going to be to sort of go for what's right top of mind.
But there's one more point on that. The survey was a year ago, and I think the community is in a much different place today. That was a March survey.
I would say the focus groups also said neighborhood schools are extremely important.
Right.
There were several comments that advocated for neighborhood schools.
Right. And that's not the only data point that came out of the survey. And we had many other things that we discussed extensively earlier in this process. I'm just saying that we have, let's remember that we have all this data here that is just as relevant today as it was a few months ago.
The problem with the data, and I think it's very valid, the problem is there's no cost benefit associated with that. So it's just, do you want your neighborhood school? Sure. Do you want your neighborhood school? Your taxes are going to go up or reduce again in 5 years. So I need to be very careful with the follow-up question on what a survey is.
What I'm going to try and do is get a headline on each of these so that we understand what we got to do next week. My headline that I just wrote down or Wednesday is A is intriguing, expensive, with lots of variables. What are the things we need to talk about for B? There were 4 question marks on B.
So I put a yes and a question mark. You probably saw that. We're confused why I did that. I think personally, I think it's a good model. The question mark I still have is the sustainability, because we argued this, we talked about it last week. It's a 9-building model. It's not an 8-building. So the question is this something that is just going to be something we have to redistrict or review again in 5 or 10 years when we're getting the fund balance again? Because
Well, and I could just weigh in on that. I talked to Julie today. She was she had a volleyball game.
I voted yes for this.
What's that?
Yeah, I voted yes. I just had a question.
For the record. No, but she just said if that comes up, that in looking at it again, that she could see that Green Bay, that what did she said there was a way that would eliminate another building. Oh, oh well, no, because that's the same. Sorry,
There is a way, but it's unfortunately the.
Because she talked to me about the sustainability issue that over time, that the Oak Terrace Early Childhood would move to maybe the Wayne Thomas building if it needed to, but that doesn't reduce the number of buildings, so.
So one thing on the front end about this one that I want to bring up with regards to cost is that you're converting a middle school to an elementary school and one of our better elementary schools to a middle school. Which, as far as working with existing structures, gives me, it's not a sustainability question, but it is a financial consideration to take Indian Trail, which is a really excellent elementary school as far as our inventory goes, and turn it into a middle, and take Northwood and turn it into an elementary. I'm not sure about the efficiency on that front.
I raised a question on that.
Yeah.
You covered a couple of the points about the schools changing, from elementary to middle and middle to elementary. But also, I'm thinking Wayne Thomas is also, I would probably put in as second as in our inventory as a good, well-built school. I mean, of course, Oak Terrace, is in a place of its own there, as far as newness. But I also wonder if Elm Place could support, the building is old and it's on a ravine, and I don't know that it could take that much extra population and upgrading and traffic and, without burying the parking garage under putting a field on top of it or something. I'm just concerned about the tightness of having Elm Place as the one middle school.
Okay, so B is about sustainability and structure.
I do want to raise one thing. I do want to raise one thing that I think, I don't know if people have thought of about B, and I'm sorry to keep talking, I'm trying to stay quiet.
Don't apologize.
Keep talking.
But one thing that is something to consider is that from a financial savings standpoint, there is some savings from a staffing standpoint for having fifth grade and middle school over elementary school. Because you're going to have kind of more, with only fifth grade, only 2 buildings versus in 6 or whatever we have, it would be into the K through 5 models. You are going to have kind of a more even allocation of class sizes and things like that over time. So that's something that should be considered here. Like I don't know what the numbers are. We haven't done that work yet. That's something that the board wanted to do. If this does get advanced as one of the concepts, that's what the board would have to do, certainly with the district's financial folks. But that's something that could be a consideration from a sustainability standpoint here versus some of the other models.
Excellent.
Yeah, on that same point, there's also the benefits you've already talked about fifth graders having access to some of the facilities in the middle school would provide more opportunities for them.
When I was running for the school board was 2 years during which time Red Oak was changed from a middle school to an elementary school. It was extremely successful in the end. So that would not be a hesitation.
I think it's easier to go in that direction than to go in the other direction, because like Indian Trail has bathrooms in every classroom, and I think Jory made the point early on that that's probably not something a middle schooler would.
Yeah, I mean.
She's our middle school expert.
I mean, think about if you wanted, all of us, imagine if there was a bathroom in this room. Would you want to use it in here?
With 13.
Yeah, it's just, yeah.
I would just say that this concept of moving middle schoolers, or moving the fifth grade to middle school just needs to be further tested. Because it came out during the focus groups where a lot of members of the focus group said, I want my kid to have a fifth grade buddy, or I want my fifth grader to have a kindergarten buddy. But also, they saw the merits in having a better tailored facility for K-2. Or I'm sorry, that's a different matter. That's great. It's been a couple weeks. But that's the general takeaway is a lot of people had reservations about that concept. So I would just say that needs to be further tested.
I would back it up real quick by saying that, we had one comment that, one individual said, well, eighth grade boys are men, and I'm not so sure about having fifth graders near them. So there's definitely a lot of different opinions there. So.
I went to a K-12 school. That's very different.
I just gonna say, I think historically Elm Place was 4th through 8th, and people I've talked to who went there when it was 4th through 8th, there were a lot of people in this community who thought it was a good thing. But I just want to make a point politically. B is very attractive because you've got Elm Place stays as a middle school. That's a big issue. You've you've got a elementary school to the north. I don't think you're going to have as much displacement in this model, and of course you keep Brayside and Ravinia open, so you really could build some consensus there. I think what's hidden in a lot of these models, and I made this comment I think to Ronnie, is that people, when they see that the building that they're associated with is still open, well, they assume that they're going to go to that building. But that may not be the case at all. And the concern is when you actually get around doing boundaries and things, people are going to say, geez, Indian Trail's still open. I've always gone to Indian Trail, and now you moved me over here. That's a big issue and concern. And I don't know how you create the foundation to do that.
C had the closest match. It was 10-7, I think. 10-7-2. What do we want to figure out about this next time?
Yeah, I actually voted no for C, but not because I don't like the model.
Right.
I voted because I don't think it's going to fly with the one middle
Same.
school. So,
You could have been in our first day's focus group.
Yeah.
There was a bunch of stuff. You were there.
All the time. Oh, I walked out of that meeting, being at that focus group, and all I could think of was like, this is the Bernie Sanders plan. Where everyone's like, oh yeah, Bernie Sanders has a great idea, but you never win the election, so we can't actually have him president, have him run. I feel like everybody's the same thing. It's like Model C is like, oh, this is a great idea, and I love it, and this is great class sizes, and this is such a great, sustainability model, but it'll never work. And I hate that. Leaving the politics side of it out, I hate the idea that we have a good idea, but it's not a good idea.
I just think that there was a lot of negative talk about one middle school last time. Yeah, this might be hard.
I think about the negative talk about one middle school, but I also think that, I don't know how many people we've got to sway, but it's not like we have to convince everybody, We have to convince, 10% more people than last time?
To Alice's point, though, about people valuing an elementary school in their neighborhood, this is a big ask for a community that puts a high premium on that.
And the other thing that you guys can do and probably should do in your recommendations is there's a difference between assigning a value judgment to an option and saying you are recommending this to move forward because you need to get something passed. These are all good ideas at some level. These are very well-researched good ideas that would all result in positive change for your student. You're not going to put 8 forward. You're probably going to put 3 forward because you can't do anything with 8. You need to explore a smaller group or you're never going to get anywhere. So this is about people saying, this is a great option and I stand by it and I think we would love to do this, but we're not recommending it moving forward because we can't move all these forward and this one doesn't have the opportunity to X, Y, and Z. So that's the only way you're going to get to some consistency next week. I'm writing a report, or on Wednesday I'm writing a report, is being able to say that. I stand by it, it's good, but we're not moving it forward because. Does that make sense?
Yeah. My problem is I don't want to go too much into conventional wisdom. Obviously, this can't pass. I don't think that's necessarily true. We haven't really tested it. I think that it's interesting enough and exciting enough a model that it should be one of the 3 we pass on for further review because, and a lot of that review is, can this thing pass? And you use the survey for this, et cetera, because there's just the financial sustainability is so excellent. It keeps Northwood, don't necessarily like the idea that it keeps Brayside or Ravinia, but I'm okay with it in this situation. So you have a lot of pluses for it. And yeah, I know it's going to be a long climb uphill maybe, but I think it's worth at least investigating.
Well,
I agree.
and
I
also on Mark's scoring process, it had a 30. It was the second highest one. A lot of people reacted positively to it on the posting.
I think it's good if we're going to make a recommendation of 3. It's not a bad thing to have one that is a little provocative.
I think C is good for a number of different reasons. One, it takes the middle school and puts it in the middle of town. And I think that was as much of an objection to the last plan as anything, because that big middle school was all the way in the southwest corner of Highland Park. I think people objected to that. I think the bigger issue, aside from cost, and I kind of like this plan, is that you're closing Ravinia, Brayside, and Lincoln, although Lincoln's been in the crosshairs for 20 years, but you're also closing Ravinia and Brayside
And Red Oak.
and Red Oak, and that's an issue.
Well, and the Indian Trail is no longer an elementary.
Right,
So
Indian
what do
Trail's
your
no longer
elementary
known
school
elementary
boundaries
school.
actually look like?
It's awfully drastic for me, and I was a question mark, I wasn't a no. And one of the reasons is there still is in this community a lot of identification with what were the old 3 school districts. You're taking 4 schools away from 108. I just don't think that's a great idea in terms of getting it to pass. Whether it's a great idea educationally, those are the 2 things we have to measure.
Yeah.
I'm opposed and voted no for C, and my reasoning is, would be, middle school would be the only time in our children's career that there wasn't a second option if your child wasn't working out at that school. And there are many times that children need to be moved from one school to another because of special needs, whether that is they're being bullied at a school. They feel like, well, it could be anything from their sexual identity, cyberbullying. There's a lot of different problems educationally that are solved by moving a child into another school, seeing if that location can work. We've got 2 high schools. We've got multiple elementary schools. But the most difficult time in a child's career educationally is middle school, for the emotional times. That to eliminate a second school, what I think we would have is we would have a whole lot of outsourcing. And when you have to outplace a child for behavior into another place, such as like the Allendale or all of these other places, you're talking over $35,000 a year. When you start doing that, you've really raised another ongoing cost that nobody is looking at. When we have 2 middle schools, no matter where they are, no matter which they are, you have that ability to transfer back and forth, whether somebody's being recruited from a gang or whatever. And there is too much going on, and I think we need to be able to, bullying is such a huge issue in our society that we need to make sure that we have taken everything that we can to protect the children, and having 2 middle schools will do that.
So what I think, so it's 9 o'clock, I want to be aware of this. I will stay as late as you guys want. I want to get us through these options. I think what we're hearing is a lot of really good restating of people's positions on these issues. What we're going to have to get to is how we're going to decide to move some of them forward or not. What I'd like to do is run through the rest of the options to see what the open questions are, and then we can figure out how we get through these on Wednesday.
I just also want everyone to know that there are actually some items under other, so I want to set expectations. There's other.
Yeah, I was wondering whether we should really even consider whether it could pass in making these projections based or prognostications. It seems to me that if you want to put up a provocative scheme, then that would be fine. And then I'm presuming that down the road there will be a further public opinion survey. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes, I would hope there would be more
So,
engagement.
well, really, as far as I see it, it really shouldn't be within our.
Well, I think we've identified the questions for tonight,
Yep.
right? And we're going to talk about the next step.
Fine.
How do we make the decision on Wednesday?
So for
Or
model,
we'll still be here on Wednesday.
so Model D had the most support, 15.32. What are the open questions on Model D? Anything? Don't feel compelled to make one up if you don't have one.
I was a no because it keeps Brayside and Ravinia open and closes Wayne Thomas. I think that's politically not viable.
Closing those 2 schools.
No, you keep Brayside and Ravinia open and close all the schools, all the elementary schools north of 22. A referendum will be defeated. There's opposition already being formed.
So perhaps the question is north-south equity.
Yes,
But do we have-
exactly.
But that applies to E too.
Yes, it does.
Although I don't-
Those two options are not
Rick,
viable.
since you brought it up, I disagree with you. I did talk to several people, some political leaders in Highwood, and Fort Sheridan during the forums, and they actually were supportive. I was surprised they were supportive of this model.
Yeah, and I also don't think that reflects what we've heard from the community at large.
Well, the difference that D makes, to Rick's point, is that in D, even though Wayne Thomas closes, Oak Terrace has 4 sections mono and 4 sections dual, so it changes the mix. And that addresses my neighborhood.
Dan, I think you're missing the nuance of the point. It's not that from my conversations north, it's not that people wouldn't move to a new part of town. It's that if Braeside and Ravinia stay open, that's 2 for them and none for me.
That's what I'm
Is
trying to say.
that really how you want to frame this conversation?
No, I'm saying that is the feedback I've been hearing.
You've been hearing, okay.
I feel like we have
in the
been
north.
very accurately sort of describing the north-south equity problem, which is
I
about
think that's the
equitable change. So maybe we just
I'm
capture
going to
that.
say it. I'm going to say it. We had this conversation a lot in the education group early on, first, like in 2016 when we started. And I don't know if we ever talked about it in the big room. If you have 2 middle schools and your second middle school is Northwood is already bursting at the seams. They're in trailers. And my feeling is that if you keep, and Northwood's growth is constrained by Wayne Thomas. And if you keep Wayne Thomas and Northwood there, then I feel that you're dinging the kids in that part of town twice because you're giving them a compromised elementary and a compromised middle.
But let's not debate that now, because I think the question is not so much whether it's right or wrong, but that is the
But
question.
that's
balance.
inequity, I would say.
So people
Right.
will perceive it, if there's a huge gap with how people perceive it from what the truth is, do you want to take that on? That's the question mark. So that's just what we have to talk through about whether we want to advance it or
And
not.
how do you,
It's not about
how
what's
do
actually
you write
right,
a
it's
report
about.
in a way that shows that you understand the complexity of these issues?
Yeah.
You
Just
can
make sure
solve
both
them all,
your-
but you can lay them out.
Make sure both your questions now, not why you say yes or no.
Yep, yeah.
I know you said it, I'm just.
And I'd like to just comment on the feedback as we work through this, that when we're giving anecdotal information, I've talked to this person, if I've heard from that person, we need to keep in mind that we have data. We have feedback from the community, feedback from the forums, that it doesn't need to be, my friend said, if this happens, it's not viable. That's not what we're looking for in this conversation. This conversation should be about what the work that we've done and where it's brought us, and what questions we have about these models. It shouldn't be, my friend said it's not viable.
You know, I don't entirely agree with you, Melissa, and I'll tell you why. We've talked about the political reality of these various models. And the political reality has been, and it's been that way since before consolidation, and certainly with consolidation, that the North has gotten short shrift. That's one of the reasons, for example, Oak Terrace got rebuilt and Lincoln didn't, because those were the 2 schools in the crosshairs at the time. And that was a political reason for Oak Terrace. What you're hearing from Rick and some of the others, and myself too, because that's my neighborhood, is this is an issue for them. So it's yes or it's no, but it's something that we need to consider as we move forward, because there are political considerations, just for the very same reason as I said, you know, that other model has Ravinia, Braeside, and Lincoln all gone. That's a political issue in the southern part of town.
Let me stop you, because I think this is really important that we have a clear consensus on this. There are a lot of boogeymen that can kind of come in and stir and steer the discussion, people who know something. And you're an authority figure, you've been on the school board in the past, and you're saying, this is a fact. If that fact isn't verified by the work we've done in the last year, we're not considering it.
All I'm saying is we're considering political considerations,
Ralph.
Ralph. That's all I'm saying.
We can discuss them,
But there was
has
a
to be
mix
evidence
of
for what we picked
responses.
up.
In our data, there was
It
a
has
mix
to
of
be picked up.
responses.
There are so many people involved in this process who want to steer it based on, I see this, I know that. I'm not picking on you, Ken.
No, I don't
Because
think
there's
so.
so much sort of conventional wisdom about that. If we haven't seen it, picked it up and seen it 3 times, I'll really push back hard on us putting it in a consensus document. I really will.
Yeah.
I just, we cannot let that kind of creep into our process this late date. This is exactly when it happens.
And
too.
what I would offer from a process standpoint is, as a group, commit to being consistent in that approach. So if we're going to put in a political reality that one middle school has a harder time of passing, tie that back to, as we heard in focus groups, et cetera, have some basis for it, right? The same way, if you're going to do north-south equity, you tie it back to something that we've heard in this process, or don't bring political realities into it at all.
That's a much better way than I said it, because I think it's important, because remember back in the early days of 2.0 when there was this very heated rhetoric around it, and the sounding board was going bananas, and people were talking about it's controlled by this one or that one, and there was all this, and that's kind of died down a lot, you know? There's still a couple people that continue to rail against it, but for the most part, that's kind of died down. And if people start to hear stuff that they associate with individuals or schools of thought coming back, I think it'll just fuel that perception that the same special interests who are always kind of like pushing for one thing or another thing are doing it again, if we don't have that exquisitely clear tie back to what we turned up. So that's what I think is super important about how we communicate.
And when you say when you say what you just said, you mean by data, okay? That we can back it up by what we heard in the surveys and in the forums and in the. And that's what you're referring to, right? Not what we heard on the street.
Right.
But say in one middle school, that's very clearly defined by data. It's called a failed referendum, 1/3 of Highland Park voting for.
But what I'm scared of the north-south stuff, because it's very kind of cloak and dagger, and so is the dual language stuff.
Yeah.
So that's where we have to be really careful about what we pick up and put in the document. Not like everybody knows that blank.
But I guess,
don't know
right,
the-
I just want to say briefly what I was responding to is that this idea of tit for tat in terms of close a building here, close a building there, doesn't necessarily get you to an equitable configuration.
Right.
Yes.
And Raph, you were saying
But it gives
about
you the
dual
shared
language, I think-
sacrifice, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, getting no referendum doesn't get you to an ideal situation.
So if we look at E, what are the open questions?
I can tie this into the previous discussion and
Yep.
E, but the survey and the Post-it notes on the community feedback and stuff I heard in the focus group, there isn't equity in this plan. And you know, it's the dominance of the dual language on the north side, and it's the fact that there is no monolingual school on the north side, and it's the fact that you know it's Wayne Thomas is closed and Brayside and Ravinia stay open, and people do not perceive that as equity.
I think just maybe a different spin on that. I think if Indian Trail is in most of these, the northernmost, whatever the northernmost school should be, it should be big. And in this one, Indian Trail is only 3 sections. So if there was a way to make it 4 sections to absorb a bigger portion of the Wayne Thomas and Indian Trail population, that might be an improvement to some. It doesn't solve, you know, the problem of Wayne Thomas completely closing, but it might make it a little better.
Yeah, Michael, I was a question on E, because I think boundaries and was sort of the corollary to Megan's point, which is that where does the north go if Indian Trail stays at 3?
So not only that, I would say there's another thing. All of these things I said I wasn't going to talk about tonight, I am actually talking about tonight, so I apologize, but I feel like we can't really hold off on thinking about this. If there is, and we've heard and seen a lot of interest in the community, 2 middle schools comparable size with dual and both, then it really begs the question if educationally academies are going to be the path forward that makes the most sense. You may want to see dual and mono and mixed sites. Now, this presents a lot of problems when you've got multiple 3-section schools, because you're going to have a single section of this, a single section of that. Again, you know, it's hard because we're not going to hear from the board between now and the time that we make our recommendation. But to me, that's a huge question that could actually change the shape of a number of these configurations. If you rethink the assumptions about where dual goes for elementary and for middle, then these can all look very different. And in terms of where the kids actually go, if you're shifting away from academies, that could really change.
Actually, I think E does lend itself to a really easy take-home message because it came through in the forums, it came through in the focus groups. This is the model that people perceive as the compromise plan. Rightly or wrongly, it has a lot of flaws because it tries to fit square pegs into round holes because it's a compromise, but this is the one that's the way people understand this. It's not perfect, but it's gets us somewhere.
Yep.
I heard that in the Wednesday night focus group too.
F. Open questions on F.
We only had one question mark response.
So F, G, H, F, H, and G are pretty consistent in terms of numbers. G had the lowest yes and the highest no of anything on here, right? So we can walk through them. F, G, and H.
There also weren't a ton of questions on F, G, and H. So F had one question,
I
G
think
had one
there's
question.
probably not a lot of questions on them because they're the ones that have the least amount of change. They're the most straightforward values. They are all very similar and natural progressions to what PDF3 would or could have been.
They're also the ones the community doesn't really like.
Right, but I would tend to have a little bit of caution in jettisoning all three of them. When you look at a range of options that you're going to propose and thinking about how they're going to be implemented and what a overall construction and implementation and execution plan might look like. And when you start looking at if you're going to close, all three of those close the elementary, the second largest capacity elementary school in the district. So you're naturally going to have some more significant boundary changes in the other plans than in these. And so as you start to look at the big picture there, I would use a lot of caution in getting rid of all three if your plan is to provide a range of options.
I also want to point out that the question that's been raised about the dual language in middle school, which has been talked about in some other models, that was the source of a lot of the negative comments that I observed on these models on F and on G specifically. Specifically, only the two sections of modeling will go to Wayne Thomas going to Northwood. So, that could be if one of these models were to be moved forward, that would be a very reasonable thing to be considered in terms of like if that there was so much negative feedback on that specific element of these plans that to have that be part of the school because it's as Adam said, these don't have a lot of change, and in some ways people perceive that as being problematic, I think, but there are other things that could possibly be done to these plans, modifications to them that could be forwarded with something like this to say.
Do we need to present a range of options? Like you said, aren't we supposed to present the best options? Like, I don't want to present plans that we don't like, the community doesn't like, focus groups don't like, the survey, I just feel like, what's the point?
I think we need to talk about that separate from this part of the discussion because that's very valid. We have to talk about what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, do we need to present a range or can we just present the best? I just don't, I don't know.
Well,
go ahead.
I think that what a lot of the negative response, as I said, having price tags attached to these, people saw that they aren't significantly cheaper than the other options, but I think that the other thing that people saw, and what I was hearing at the forums at least, is that they replicate some of the challenges that we're trying to solve for, right? So they retain 2-section programs, they retain the highest amount of building inventory, and so it's a question of what's the best we can do in a successful referendum.
But do we want to have the option of having something that can be done without a referendum? That, it seems that there's some desire on the part of the board for that, and at least something like H, it has some improvements. There are more 3-section schools now, but it can be crammed in without doing a referendum, is asymmetric.
You can get to D and E without a referendum in the short term in terms of drawing boundaries.
But it doesn't do as much good because, yeah.
It does the same amount of not good.
Yeah.
One of the problems in having one over three is that we haven't gotten to the point where we have a good handle on sustainability or cost, which I understand the board is going to get into once we've selected three.
Right.
And there could be, I know in my conversations with people, the sustainability thing is the biggest selling point to spending more money than they'd really like to spend. And I think that's a very key thing, that if you're stuck with one recommendation, you don't have all the information now to justify it. I think I'm counting on the board to pick up where we are and get into those kind of
evolution. Let me offer this to help streamline this a little bit. Think about your options as you come back together on Wednesday as three options. What are we recommending as a body to move forward? What are we recommending as a body to not move forward? And there's a third bucket of these are still really good thoughts and we need further exploration, so we're passing them to the board with this pro and con context around them. That's a very powerful option in reaching a consensus report to move forward. So think about that in terms of Wednesday. You have to be able to say some of these things aren't going to move forward. You can say they're good options, we like them, but we're not putting our stamp of approval to move them forward because then we've not done anything in a year to advance the cause. You have to be willing to get rid of some of these. You also have to be willing to say that as a group, we think these have more pros than cons, and therefore there are recommended options. And there can still and will likely be this bucket of other that says, I'm making this up, F, G, and H were all seen as a status quo option that costs more money than they save, but we're not willing to take them all off the table yet, so we'd like the board to consider an option of one of these. There are ways you can still phrase these
Don't
that
these
make
numbers
sense.
suggest that most of us are willing to take these off of the table?
100%.
So what do you do with that?
You also had some board guidance to not do that. So that's where you get into the political realities of what is this committee wanting to do?
And we do a really good job writing up why we aren't recommending them and what would have to be different or what would need to be potentially some conditions that would make them more appealing, right? I mean, we sort of,
and the more context and
there's a
guidance
reason we
that
put them in
provide
front of the public to begin with, right?
Exactly.
You're not just handing letters over to the board.
Right.
You're providing framing, you're laying out the values and the criteria that you're using to make your decision. You may be offering some models as preferences, and you're laying out a little bit of a process going forward too.
Actually, the way Raphael put that is exactly right. We need to say, okay, we don't like it for this reason, but if this happened to it, it might be definitely something we're thinking about.
Right. That's the point one and
really,
point two
I mean,
that was
I
being-
probably rephrased it wrong, but you said it better, but that's what we need to do.
You're providing very refined options to the board to advance. That's a good thing. We should have to frame it that way.
It seems there's a little bit of methodological observation, there's a little bit of ambiguity about what we're doing in the report. And while we clarified that a little bit, we clarified it only after doing the straw poll, which we presented as a straw poll. But some of us are suggesting that the results of the straw poll should in fact eliminate items. And we're people that already know what the purpose of the report is. 3 different types of plans, only plans we believe are viable. The results of the straw poll could theoretically be different, particularly if people knew that there were variants they could produce. So I would like to get, I'm a little foggy on it, clarity of like what we're putting in the report for some sort of agreement or some sort of pathway to that agreement. And then I think that would help us actually determine how to make these decisions.
Can I try to recap and see if this is what we all heard? So what I heard was, and what I agree with, is there's 3 groups in the report. There's things that we've said, based on our work, these look like you should look at them closely. And maybe that's the 2 to 3 that we're talking about, Jory. It's not only one.
Yeah.
Then there's some where we said, we can't see a way to recommend this following group, but here's some insightful information about them. This is why we tested them. This is what we heard. These are things that people liked about them. And then the third group is, here's another group that didn't make it into the yes group or the recommendation group, but where there's more nuanced discussion. And C seems like the perfect example of that, where we had a balance of, if this were in fact a poll, which it isn't, because we have to vote officially to do that, where there's some strong pros and cons. The group of people feel that we have a lot of input, including a referendum last year where the single middle school was not seen as gaining support, but there's all these benefits, right? I mean, that's kind of what we're doing, right? So we need to keep these things in play. There's nothing that goes away forever. These 8, we're gonna be living with them right up to the board report and maybe beyond that. But we do want to be clear about the ones that we are recommending for further advancement, right?
Absolutely. That's right. And I think this board, the goal is to come out with a report that all of you can stand up and defend how you got to that point, even if you don't defend with every recommendation. I think that has to be said in a group of 30 people. You have to be able to say, no, option C was my favorite and I wish we could have advanced it, but out of a year of process with lots of community input, it didn't emerge as the option that we as a group came up with, and here's why.
Exactly. So
and I still believe it's a good one.
If you're passionate about it and you say, Wayne Thomas closing and Ravinia and Braeside staying open is going to make the following people mad, that needs to be in the report as something that we picked up, or there was, stuff like that.
Are we going
so
to
that
report?
even if we advance it, I'm not saying word for word like that.
No.
But if there are nuances, things that we still think are worth recommending, but there are powerful nuances for some stakeholders, I think what you're saying, for someone to feel that way out of us 30, they would have to see the thing that they really liked described as such, and the thing that they really disliked, even if it was recommended, they've got to be able to read their comment or their kind of insight that was supported by the community in there.
And I'm even comfortable with people being able to say to their friends and neighbors and stakeholders, I'm not in love with Model F, but I fully support the process by which we as a group put that forward as a recommendation.
There's always a dissenting side, even in Supreme Court cases, right? Somebody always has to put in the words about what was the other way to look at it, and they didn't.
Not
What
today's
we're
decision.
completely ignoring is what we heard was, just make a decision already. So, and I'm not disagreeing with, we gotta cover everything, but if we keep these 8 models alive and keep saying, well, we can do this, we can do that, then we're just gonna, it's just gonna go on forever. And we were talking a little bit about, what the report, the least amount of wording in the report that someone's gonna latch onto and say, this report on page 832 said this.
Right.
I know this community well, I've lived there for a very long time.
Yeah.
We have to back up our ideas, but if we just continue down this path of 8 options, or 9 options, or 7 options, it's a disaster.
I'm just saying, I'm not saying we're keeping them alive.
I understand.
I'm saying we
I
have
know
to say
exactly.
why we like them or why we don't.
I understand, but you said, but if you do this, it's the but if you do this part, it's a never-ending issue.
Well, and my question, Ralph, and I guess
say that.
the reason that I reacted to, I heard from this person or that person is how much of the work that we do in the next couple of weeks, but also that in the report that we produce needs to be grounded in the data that we have collected, because I'm not super comfortable with the idea of letting the anecdotal drive decisions and recommendations.
I absolutely agree with you.
I would just say that if we're to, I would just say, I hear you loud and clear. I am sure that in all this data, it's all there.
Yeah.
So I would just say that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, it may not be there 3 times, but I would just say that the themes could all be there in the data. So I hear you don't want to let the anecdotes or the Facebook comments, whatever, sort of drive it. But I also think if we were to each actually go study the 3,000 pages of data, it probably would all be.
I would say, I think maybe some of my word choice might have made it sound more like I was saying, let's print a verbatim of what somebody said. I'm suggesting that if people are interpreting, we didn't ask every single question explicitly in a certain way.
No.
If there's several people that feel that some feedback that we did get directly, like equitable distribution of resources across the district, if for some people that meant that they would see a configuration as not meeting that goal, and that they think there might be other people in the community, I think you can capture it that way. It's not saying, hey, my neighbor who lives here thinks that. You know what I'm saying?
And nothing's nixing a recommendation either. It's a bullet point in a report to be able to say this is what we heard and this is what we heard from the data.
And it might force a question in the next survey.
Yeah. Right. So what we need to figure out
quick
is how to
question.
not do this forever. But go ahead.
How long is this report supposed to be? Because if it's supposed to be 892 pages, or is it supposed to be something that could be printed on 2 sheets of paper with a couple of bullet points? I think but there is a vast thing. There's a vast difference between War and Peace and you know.
Cliff notes.
And, you know, something
That is
good for the soul,
Right.
chicken soup for the soul
Right.
book or something. So we want to find, I want to find out how long is this piece supposed to be, because then I think we can figure out what we need to put in it. Because if we start doing anecdotal things, if people in the board already have all of this, which I'm assuming they do, we don't need to put it down again.
That's right.
We can condense.
So before, that is a lovely segue, but
Yeah.
before we wrap up, I want to make sure that you feel that we're at a good point to move on from 6.1 through 6.2.
If I was writing this report tonight based on the straw poll, which is a straw poll and not a vote, and based on the feedback, et cetera, you have models D, E, and B that are recommended to move forward. You have model C that has a lot of good and bad that needs further exploration, and you have models A, H, F, and G that have lots of merits but don't have the support to move forward as a board as a group recommendation. That's not an opinion, that's me reading data and telling you how I'd write a report. Take that into Wednesday and figure out how you're going to write your report. It's got to have those buckets. Based on feedback, based on data, based on the consensus of this group, we're moving these forward. Based on all those things, we're not moving these forward. And based on all of that, this needs more recommendations. Think about what those buckets are going into it. And as much as, I want to be careful how I state this, as much communication as there can be with all parties involved, I think that's really important. A really bad result would be to have 3 options come out and then have the board pick a 4th option that wasn't debated. So you need to make sure that what goes forward moves this process forward. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn at all. I'm just saying I've worked in a lot of districts, and where these fall apart is when the board picks an option that the community group didn't put forward somewhere.
Can we ask
So if
board
you
members
think
what
that's a
they
real
think?
risk, then write the report with enough room that this report doesn't get thrown out if the board looks at a different option. That's just the political
Mike,
reality.
when some of this have it be built into an educational vision and long-range planning vision, that they'll be able to pick up a lot of the nuances that aren't, quote, model specific, but they can write that into. And that's where the latitude comes.
Yep.
Not necessarily that you include all 8 models, but you include the latitude in the theme or the metrics or whatever, the process of getting to a workable model that's worth for them to evaluate.
Then we're actually done. I mean, we should just hand the 8 models over and say, go.
No, you don't want that big a spectrum. You want to put your stamp on it.
But then if we have been not convened by this board, but we've been convened by a former board to put together a recommendation or a group of recommendations, I think we need to decide what we're recommending.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, if the board chooses it, I mean, you guys, some of you are in here, that's fine. But that's a political decision, and there's 7 votes, and that's the vote that matters until the community votes. So that all has to come into play. Otherwise, we have 8 vetted options that we should just present to the board and say, okay, go.
I can't stress enough, as it gets later, I lose my ability to be a bit more nuanced, so accept this for what it is. I can't stress enough how different this community is from a process standpoint than any place I've ever worked. The level of animosity and mistrust is unbelievable. The only way this moves forward is if what comes out of this group adds to rebuilding trust instead of drawing people apart. This has to be as close to a consensus document as you can bring, or you're not going to get anywhere. The board has to be willing to take some of these recommendations because they're written in a way that moves the process forward. Otherwise, you have another failed referendum, and the 3rd one becomes the best cobbled together option. There's no, I'm not trying to be direct, I'm not trying to be rude. The level of animosity and division in this community has to be made better by the process, or else it's going to be another failed referendum. So keep that in the mind as you make hard decisions on your option not moving forward.
You know, to your point, we all saw what happened when CFAC came out with their report that many of us worked very hard on, and the board basically said, thank you very much, and put it on the shelf. So that hasn't been lost on either the community or the board. It seems to me that what this report is going to look like, because the board, I mean, the board's here. The board has been here. The board, we're part of the board, as it has evolved. It seems to me what the report is somewhere between 2 pages and 800, facetiously said. But But the fact is, what it has to point out is the process that was gone through and the transparency that has gone into the process that has led this group to come up with, 3 we like, 3 we're not so happy with, although they would work, and 2 or 3 that we think could work, and hand it off to the board, but say to the community, this is the process. It's been open to you from day one. We have encouraged you to come on board. We have encouraged you to jump in. We've had surveys, forum, all these different groups, and you're going to have more opportunities still, but this is how we got here, and this is why we're going forward with what we have. That it's not really a report to the board as much as it is a piece to the public saying, this is what we've done, and this is why we've gotten to this point.
You've also uncovered some really important things in a year of doing this. You've come to, it seems like the community's come together that the status quo isn't an option any longer. The community's come together and said, we're not going to fund what we put on the ballot last time, so don't come back to us with that. We want full-day kindergarten. There are things that have come out of this that you didn't have at the last referendum. Don't let those get lost. Those are huge steps forward in finding consensus. So start there with your report, argue about the options you want to put forward, but come to some ability to put them forward, and then give some recommendations. Don't go into a communications vacuum. Don't go dark. Figure out the role of 2.0. Figure out who the spokesman for this process is when this gets handed over. That deserves some consideration. Who's speaking for this once it gets handed over? Those are recommendations that you can pass to the board for future thinking about. I think this is probably about a 30-slide deck if I was drafting this.
I have a friend.
Reiterate our commitment to the process.
Right.
And the ongoing process.
And understand that you've done everything you can to move the ball forward in a year, and you have. This is nothing short of remarkable. So now pass the ball off in a way that builds confidence that the board, who is made up of a lot of members who sat around this table, is going to do their due diligence to keep advancing the ball in an open, transparent way. And if the options change, those are going to change in an open, transparent way.
So I guess what you're saying, though, that's different than we have. So every time we've gone back to the process in these moments of ambiguity or tension about how to proceed, and there have been many.
Yep.
When we've stuck with the process and we just sort of held hands and sort of forged ahead, I feel like it's worked out well more often than not. And I guess the piece here that we just have to make sure we're doing is we need to make choices. We need to recommend things, Darren. I agree with that. But we've got to make sure that transparency continues unabated through the handoff process that you're coming back to. So how do we ensure that it never looks to anyone? We know because it's organic and we have so many board members that have been involved throughout and they know exactly how we've done everything. But how do we ensure that it never ever looks like it was a report that went on a shelf and different things came out, right? Because even that can be very damaging. We've worked so hard to foster this trust, I think. So that's what we have to be really careful of in the next really few weeks.
So very practically, what I'd suggest for next Wednesday is you do another version of the straw poll this Wednesday. You do another version of the straw poll that does start turning into a vote, and that you start constraining the number of yeses, nos, and maybes that people can put on that page as an exercise. I would suggest you each have 3 yeses, 3 nos, and 2 maybes. And you do an initial round of that to see where you are after a very active debate and 2 nights of sleeping on it. That starts to get you to a position of understanding where you need to fight a little bit more and where you're gonna say, I've made my point, my understanding is 16-1 is not gonna become 10-10, we're gonna figure this out, we're gonna write a report. Once you get those buckets of yes, no, and maybe, I would go through as a group and write as concisely as you can the pro and con for each one, because that becomes the context.
Could you give the numbers again, please?
Yeah, so I would do 3 yes, 3 no, and 2 maybes.
Thank you.
Okay. Anne, did you want to say that?
The only thing I want to say is this. I have a friend who says, and this is very valuable, not only does everyone in Highland Park have an opinion, but no one is afraid to state it. The one opinion that I have heard consistently throughout this process is you guys are really trying. If we can continue on that path, I think we'll be successful.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good work and a lot of good faith toward that. And you keep on saying next Wednesday. It's actually this Wednesday. We were going to ask everyone, there is an old participation Google Doc that I'd like to ignore because I'm sure that so many of you now are more interested in joining the report writing team than you previously were. I was going to ask for interest tonight, but I don't think a ton is gonna get accomplished between now and Wednesday night. So if that's okay, I'd like to push that off, but I'd like to ask everyone, let's think about how we're going to do this work. So I do think that the report prep should be OMA compliant, even if we don't meet the threshold for OMA. Anyone can come, we videotape it. There's nothing we say in these conversations that we shouldn't be willing to say on camera or in public. So think about that. I think it should be OMA compliant. I'm hitting the wall too. I think we need to break out into groups and really be very productive. Let's think about format, whether it is going to be slides or more discursive. It sounds like slides could be very effective and very compelling. And frankly, that's the format we've been working in this whole time.
Could I people think about like our teams or subcommittees of that group that you probably want to break it out to?
So
if you want to be on like, finance or you want to be on this kind of other committee.
Think about where you can bring some value and where you've got, I mean, I said it months ago that it was a sprint and not a marathon. Now it really is a sprint. For anyone who thought I was wrong then.
It's a sprint at the end of the marathon.
It is. So think about what kind of commitment you can make really in the next couple of weeks and how you'd like to support these efforts. We'll talk about it Wednesday night rather than try to grapple with this now.
As I understand it, we've decided we're going to have 3 options to present to the board, right?
We haven't
All
made
right.
any
3 yes, 3 no, 2 me.
Okay, now, my one concern is if the board strongly, I mean, if this committee strongly states to the board, this is our favorite of the 3, but we're giving you information. In the board's judgment, they don't agree with us. So you're putting them in a position that they're not listening to this group, and they may have good reason not to listen to this group. They're a political body more than we are. Now, I would be cautious about, or I would be in favor of saying these are our 3 options, and they all have good points and bad points, and not so strongly say we like this one because they may not go for it.
Yeah.
To Jeff's point and also a bunch of other people, what we really need to do is to make sure that we talk about the process going forward, because the board is going to gather information that we do not currently have.
Right.
And that will inform the process and will change what the end result is.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that in our documents, we detail that page 2 or 3 in depth. And, just really focus on that. So the board does have that flexibility to do what's necessary to come to the right decision.
Right.
Even if it doesn't exactly mirror what we handed out.
Right. And it likely won't as this evolves.
And Jeff, just to your point, I don't think we've really talked about saying we have a favorite. So I think we are pretty comfortable with it being
Well, there were,
a consensus.
as I understood some of the comments around the table, though, some people are saying this is the one that we want, and we're narrowing it down to 3 for discussion. Well, I would be more in favor of not being that strong and more or less saying here are 3 reasonable solutions. They have different costs, they have different advantages and disadvantages. They've got to make the decision.
Yeah. And I think that in that framework, we also set the board up for success. And I think that's important too, that they support us, we support them, and it's all I have to say.
Well, at the end of the day, this becomes a pro-con paper on all 8. And that's really, that's what you're saying to do, which is give the board full optionality, which is great, and I'm not disagreeing with that. But then we should just take this and distill it into what is good about any one of these models and what is bad, and then the decision is done. Which is, there's no
That's
middle
not
ground.
what I'm recommending.
I know, but that's what I'm hearing. But that's what I'm hearing we should do, as opposed to making a decision on 3 or 4, or whatever the number is.
I think you need to frame this as we have spent a year, and out of that year, we came up with 8 options. We then explored and vetted those 8 options as publicly as we could have. And out of that vetting, some of these options rose more to the top and others went more to the bottom.
This is like a
And
show
that
your
work
work
was
math
informed
problem.
by our community at large.
Right.
Darren, this is like a show your work math problem where you actually, I don't know where we're still swirling on this one. I think as we put words on the page for the report, maybe we can kind of triangulate these different concerns.
We are going to have a vote. We're going to vote on Wednesday on something. I don't know what it is. I'm confused as to what we're voting on. What are the results of that vote going to do in terms of a report? Is that going to eliminate? Then if it's eliminating, then you don't give the optionality.
It's the sorting hat. It's going to put things into three different.
So then.
None of these are not going to be mentioned in the report, right?
I'm sorry?
None of these will not be omitted. None of these are going to be omitted from the report. It's a question of how we frame it.
And then you vetted 8, and out of that vetting and extensive discussion, they then fell into 3 buckets.
Yes, no, maybe.
Well, and I asked this
Exactly
question
right.
before, but I think you may have just landed on the answer. The difference between the report and the presentation, the report has all this information that is explanation of how we got
This.
here and all of this, all our, appendices. The presentation has our recommendations.
Right.
We believe that these, that floated to the top for XYZ reason, are what we would, recommend for the district to go forward, and we'd like the board to consider.
So let's just hypothetically say the board.
So we're not showing 8
The
in the
board,
presentation.
the board favors a decision that's not one of the 3. We just painted them into a corner.
Not if they commit themselves to a process, if they don't go forward with one of the recommended options, they have a process and explanation for why that has been open and transparent, and they show their work. And I mean that really diligently, and because so many of the board members have come out of this process and understand it, I don't believe that will be an issue, but it has to be set up front. That we're not going to go into a back room and pick a different option and then announce it to everyone. That's
part of critical framing of the report.
And I think it's a very appropriate handoff for 2.0 at the board meeting to say, we fully believe that the board will continue an open, transparent process where they will show their work and move forward, and we'll stand with them in that process.
It bears mentioning that all but one board member have been working on this for a year, either
Right.
first as 2.0 members and then as board members, or as board members for the duration of the process. And that's not
You were set up
to be
for
overlooked.
just about as much success as you could have coming out of a very uncertain process. And that's a really good thing. So we just want to make sure the framing's right.
I have 2 questions. So it's on a slightly different topic. So it's just about next week, and what exactly is the plan for Wednesday? I'm not going to be able to be here. I have a funeral to go to. So is there a good way to communicate my preferences, like via do not reply email in advance, so that people kind of?
You cannot be here this Wednesday either, is what I'm understanding.
I can be here next week. I can't be
No,
here
this Wednesday you can't be here, but next week you can.
Yes.
They're kind of going to be mirror images of each other.
Okay.
So people have
There's a meeting
opportunity to be at.
Wednesday night, 2 nights.
So I think people are unclear on which Wednesdays we're meeting. Could you just like, what's-
All Wednesdays.
Yeah.
All your Wednesdays.
No, we're meeting this. We're meeting the 28th. So we're meeting the 28th, and there's a poll out for next Wednesday or Thursday.
Yes, 28th, and I'll.
We haven't clarified this.
Thursday.
Wednesday.
That would be nice if you did.
I will get the results. 1 second. I'll get the results for sprayers on the doodle for next week, but those 2 nights really should be mirror images of each other, so everybody gets the same experience between this week's Wednesday and next week's Wednesday, for people who couldn't be there to express or vote or whatever we're calling these.
Yeah.
No, I'm losing you on this mirror image thing, so.
Here, let me try and outline a process. The Open Records Act of all this makes the voting stuff complicated, and you have to be here to do that. What I would recommend is Wednesday, you do this Wednesday, 2 days from now, you do another straw poll based on all of this feedback to get a sense of the buckets that we're in. And if people can't be to that meeting, they should send an email, I would imagine, to John ahead of time with what their straw poll indication would be.
Which
So-
is kosher because it's not a real
Right,
vote.
and so we have an understanding Wednesday of where we are after this extensive dialogue. You then spend Wednesday refining, debating, arguing over that, and how I would do it literally is that straw poll that we talked about, put all the options on the wall, and then do the pro-con bullet points of each, so you're starting to frame a report. You then, next week at your meeting, could take a vote on that report.
But is the meeting on Wednesday or Thursday? I thought we were waiting on doodle poll results.
So whenever that meeting is next week, what I would suggest there is if you get 2 days from now to a point where you've got things in general buckets based on a straw poll, you've got some pro-con framing, that gives the report committee the ability to actually start writing and pulling some stuff together so that when you get together next week, you're now looking at an actual document or slide decks to get some opinion on. Otherwise, you're going to run out of time to see a document and vote on it before it moves forward.
And I
Well, the
think
11th
what-
was going to be their chance to vote on that document.
But if you spend 2 more weeks,
Well, it's not 2 more weeks, it's.
So guys, what I noticed last week was that there was a lot of anxiety around this like final vote. That which day it was gonna be, whether or not this person was gonna be there, or this person was gonna be there, you know, all of that, and there was a lot of anxiety around that vote. So something that I've been thinking about and Michael has really helped with this is framing it in a different way, that we're not taking a vote on models, that we are building consensus tonight and Wednesday night to where we are very, very close to what we want to take to the board in terms of which models. So that when we're voting next week, we are voting to move on a package, to move this package to the board that we have built consensus on. I mean, we'll have to see where we land, you know, this Wednesday night, if that is really possible, but I think we're very close to that. And I think if we can just gel that a little bit further, then our vote is on the package and not a line item vote on models where it becomes contentious, who's there, who's not, who can't vote, who can vote. That seemed very problematic when we were talking about it last week. So the process that they've laid out and that we started tonight is to get that consensus between all the documents we have and all the work that we've done, what we know from the past year. If our group can get to that consensus, then what we're voting on next week is to move that package of consensus forward.
Are we meeting on the 5th and the 6th?
So I was just gonna ask.
John Springer's did that doodle poll, and I don't know how
He did a
it
doodle
went.
poll, it's 19 for the 6th and 12 votes for the 5th. So can we just decide
Yes.
tonight so we can make
Okay.
travel plans for the?
Sure.
So
I
it was
think-
19 to 12, Thursday over Wednesday, so we'll agree to meet on Thursday.
Okay.
With the caveat that we may not be able to have an exec meeting because Melissa will be gone.
Yeah.
And I mistakenly committed to being able to be with all of you, even though my twins are turning 7, and they will probably have something to say to me about that.
Yeah.
so you're meeting on the 6th.
So, yeah.
Bring your twins.
The group will meet on the
Oh,
They'd love
you might get some new configurations out of that.
But how does everybody feel about what I just said?
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Thank you, well said.
Yeah.
Makes sense. With that, anything else? Thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much, Michael and Josh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys are
So
doing
very
good work.
helpful.
We're gonna get there.
6th.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't someone like to make a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
I thought we had other.
We're gonna push off.
Motion to adjourn takes precedent. I know that, Ann.
All right, all those in favor? Aye. Thank you.